Hey, Chuck, we're going to get started in a couple of moments.
Okay. Can you hear me?
I can.
Good.
Yep.
We couldn't hear Taina, so she is getting her situation set up.
Okay.
I can also hear your TV or radio.
Yeah. Yeah. Take. Okay.
Taina, can you hear us now?
Yes, so sorry about that. Thank you. I switched laptops and now I'm good. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Lovely. Sorry to make us go late.
Is Rebecca here also?
Yes.
She is.
Yep.
Okay, great. Are we
I mean,
ready? Are we ready
yeah.
to go? Will?
Yeah, as soon as, if you want me to give the notes for everybody.
Right.
I think most everybody here has been to a meeting before, but if you want me to go ahead and do that, I can start that.
Yeah, go
Sounds
ahead.
good.
All right, well, welcome everyone. If this is your first time joining us, we're happy to have you. You'll notice that you're muted and you're gonna stay muted through the duration of the meeting. The only folks who will stay unmuted are the committee co-chairs. As they move through their agenda, the co-chairs will call on members of the public and board members who wish to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon at the bottom of your screen and pressing the raise hand button. It's not the wave or the thumbs up. Those will disappear. Only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you're calling in from the phone, it's *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute whenever prompted. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once one of the co-chairs calls on you. If you're having problems, the chat is available for technical support only to help with Zoom software. It is not to ask questions or make comments to the co-chairs. They will not see those chats. If you're using an older version of Zoom, you will need to go to the participants section where you'll find the raise hand feature there. And finally, we encourage you not to raise your actual hand or wave at the screen because we may not be able to see you and we may miss you. So chat me if you have any problems. I'm here to support. Otherwise, we can get the meeting started.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Will. My name is Chuck Warren. I'm co-chair of the Rules and Bylaws Committee. My other co-chairs are Taina Burke, Rebecca Dengor. We want to welcome everyone to the January, sorry. It's almost February, of the Rules and Bylaws Committee. And our first issue is something that we felt needed to be looked into a little more, given some of the issues that arose in our last couple of elections, the nominating committee process. And so that's what we're doing. And I think what in discussing things with Taina and Rebecca, we came up with a number of areas where we thought we ought to discuss and see what people thought about them. And I thought that's what we ought to do and lay those on the table. And maybe I'll ask Rebecca if you have a list, or Taina, if you want to do that, to sort of lay out the lists or start off with some of the issues and we can start to discuss them.
I think, Ty, maybe if you want to start with that, but first it should be noted that any changes to the bylaws are amendments that need to be approved by the full board. And we're hoping to clarify a big part of our goal in having this meeting is some of the issues that we've noticed and inconsistencies we flagged, and maybe other aspects that you all have noticed, that we really come out of here with a couple of amendments to our bylaws to be voted on at the next meeting.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. So Rebecca, Chuck, are we sharing a screen or anything with either of these items? I can't remember.
Do you want to? We can if you want, or we can just lay them out.
I don't need to.
Okay.
So the first item on the agenda is the nominating committee. We, wanted to be sort of responsive and reflective of the challenges that, we have seen over the past two nominating committee years, but in particular this last one. It was sort of clear to us, and I think clear to many of you who serve on the board, that there just appears to be like different interpretations of how the nominating committee should function, and how sort of two-part, right? Like how the nominating committee should function when they are meeting in sort of that executive session that is confidential, and sort of what their duties and responsibilities are as nominating committee members in terms of reporting out to the board for a full vote. So we saw inconsistencies. I myself served on the nominating committee, not this year, but the year prior. So my first year on the community board. Just my own personal perspective, I found it extraordinarily confusing. And I felt like there was really sort of a lack of clarity in the bylaws to articulate exactly what the process should be for the nominating committee, both in terms of how the nominating committee functions and how the nominating committee reports out. So that was my own personal experience as a first term and first year board member. So I served on the committee just a few months after having joined, and was on the committee with another new board member that felt similarly. She's no longer on the board, but we talked about it at length at the time. And so we wanted to, make sure that we sort of clarified, and, now I will turn it back to Rebecca and Chuck for specific, if you want to chime in on the specific things we discussed, but have a broader conversation that we can then vote on at the full board, in terms of where there is language that needs to be either clarified or needs to be further specific, and where there needs to be additional language, so that moving forward we have clarity as a full board about how the nominating committee functions, and so that when we're even in the process of actually nominating committee members, there's just sort of like a general understanding amongst us on the board of what the role and responsibility of the nominating committee is. So I think we want to really get as much input as possible and have an open dialogue. And so we purposely came not with, a fully written text that we want you to review and sort of approve, but rather to have it be a collaborative discussion. So Chuck, Rebecca, if you want to add anything to that.
I would say I think a good place to start in terms of our list of, things we that need to be addressed is an inconsistency in the bylaws. When it comes to the requirements of what the nominating committee reports at the October full board meeting. The first clause that references this says that they shall report one or more candidates for each office, which means they have to pick at least one person, if not two or three. The second clause says that they may suggest one or more people. So that suggests that they can give a report without naming at least one person for an individual office. And those are contradictory. And that's, I think, a good place to start off.
Yeah, I agree with what Rebecca said. I think that's an important feature of what the nominating committee should do. And I think we have some hands that are raised here. And so I don't know if there's anyone from the public that wants to say anything about this. I know we have some people, not many, but some people from the public here. And I'm looking, I just see board members.
I don't see any hands from the public, Chuck. So I think we can go straight to members.
Sure.
Of the board. And I see Peter Patch at the top. So if we could unmute Peter Patch.
Go ahead, Peter.
Hi. It's somewhat more broadly, but on this general point, and I, as you may recall, Tyan, I was on the nominating committee last year. I actually had some communications with our then board chair. I won't mention you by name, Alita, but I always admire and respect the way you try to conduct yourself. But I very much disagreed with actually the bylaws that this it seems to me that the role of a nominating committee, if there's going to be one, should be to support the board in being informed about the various candidates, their positions, experience, and sort of aspirations in any role. And therefore that the notion that that should be a confidential session, where you get up to 30 minutes to talk to an individual candidate. And then for the full board meeting, you get, what was it, something like 4 minutes to speak to your position with no questions this year. That seemed to be in and out in terms of whether there would or wouldn't be questions. I would advocate for, first, the objective to be that the objective be to inform the full board as much as possible, that those sessions be open, not confidential, so that everybody is equally informed. And I would, first, it's a secondary point, but I would think that some give and take in the form of questions, in the public meeting would also be appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Ed, I guess Ed is next. Ed Hartzog. Can we unmute Ed?
Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, Taina. I will just speak from my personal experience from being on the board about 10 years and being through several election cycles, and then having run with Russell this time for board chair. Frankly, I feel like I'm in third grade. I don't get it. I don't understand why it's confidential. I don't understand why we have a nominating committee. I mean, I like that we talked. I mean, last year, I thought it was kind of nice that Russell and Sherry had a little time with Will to do a bit on CB8. I mean, speaks. I don't think we have enough of that, but that seemed a great way for Russell and Sherry to kind of talk about, who they are, what they've done. The board members and the public can learn more about them. I thought that was terrific. Now, we didn't do that this year, and that's okay. But to something you think Rebecca said, or maybe Taina said it, or all three of you have said it, the most consistent thing I've discovered about bylaws in my 10 years is the inconsistency. And anyway, back to the point of the nominating committee. Again, I don't understand why we have it. I don't understand the confidentiality. I mean, personally, I'll just tell you where I sit, again, just to bore all of you for the 100th time. From the election law standpoint, I don't like that secret stuff. It gives me the willies. Okay, I'll just be right up front about that. So I don't understand why we have a sort of a nominating committee with this confidentiality. What are we hiding? Maybe switch it around. Do like we used to do in college. Raise your hand. You nominate somebody. Hi, I want to run, or someone wants to run. And then you say, you get 5 minutes with the CB8 speaks or something, like you did for Russell and myself. We got 4 minutes and everybody else got 3. Maybe you do something where, you get nominated in public, then CB8 speaks, does a little bit with you, and you have less time as you go down the ballot. And then, the candidates can call people. I know Russell and I did that. I don't know about everybody else. And then, you have a vote. But I just thought I'd just throw that out there. There's nothing in particular, but just a perspective. So thanks, everybody.
I think we'll comment on that, unless you want to. We can talk.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it seems like a lot of people, they want to just kind of express their general feeling. And I think we should keep on with that. And then we'll come back to the specific points that were raised, such as, the confidentiality aspect and the inconsistency I raised earlier. I think we should just let people, I guess, continue by giving their initial thoughts and comments.
Agree. So can we unmute Rita Popper, please?
You can, there you go.
Hi. I don't see why we need a nominating committee. We have 7 people. When I first came on the board, those 7 people decided who the slate that they were going to bring forth. And they did. And then we voted on that slate. It was a done deal. It was a done deal. And I feel that we have many inexperienced, whether we're experienced or inexperienced. A committee of 7 should not decide who are the nominees. And we don't even need a committee. Throw your hat in the ring, and then you write and send out to all the board members. You send out why you want to be that person. And then we come in and you can answer some questions and we vote. I honestly feel that a nominating committee is superfluous. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Can we unmute Alita Camp, please?
Thank you. I'll pretty much just address the shall versus may, which I think flows from other comments that people have already mentioned, which is that I'm not sure the nominating committee also should pick the slate. My understanding of things, I guess before the year that I ran, when neither I nor the other person running we didn't go to the nominating committee. And the nominating committee, I believe at that time, had no recommendation for chair. I'm concerned about the word shall, because if people come before the nominating committee and really have significant issues, why should the nominating committee recommend those people for the office for which they're applying? That's my concern with shall versus may, because it may well be that no one is really suitable for the position. The other thing is that I agree with Rita in the sense that the nominating committee, and I guess Ed and Peter, that the nominating committee should not pick the slate of officers that will ultimately become officers. Now, the year again that I ran, I was nominated from the floor, and I was warned by someone that those don't end well. I think there's a different attitude of the board towards floor nominations, which is good. So if people take those nominated from the floor seriously, then I don't have as big an issue with the nominating committee. But if people don't and think that because the nominating committee vetted people, that any names that they issue or recommend are the ones that should be elected, then I do have a problem with the word shall. So I think the board needs a larger choice. I don't think the nominating committee should determine on its own who the people running the board and all of the officers are. And I also agree, and I guess I could get back to this later, about the idea of either a debate or an opportunity to answer questions or appearances on CB8 Speaks, because there's just not enough information. Everyone running calls people on the board to get their vote. And the information that's revealed in those conversations might not be known by anybody other than the person on the other end of the phone. So I think transparency is really important, and I'm not sure how to get there. I also have comments, but I'll save them for later, on decorum and civility and appropriateness in the whole campaign. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alita. Can we unmute Michelle Birnbaum, please?
Yes, thank you. I was prepared to address the initial point, which I think as a matter of procedure is a good idea, to go through the language and have us address the language as you were starting to do. However, I am eager to hear and happy to hear everybody's general comments. But in order for us to actually make a decision on a change or to propose a change, I think throughout the evening we are going to have to go over the language. So I hope we do get back to that. I want to address the language, the shall, the may. I won't specifically suggest language because I'm sure there are legal meanings to words that could be better incorporated by an attorney. But in terms of what I would like to see, I would like to see a nominating committee, and I would like to see that nominating committee have the latitude to propose none or one or more for a specific position. As a matter of fact, I was chair of the nominating committee a few years ago, and in fact, we actually didn't propose a nominee for one of the positions. And so that procedure took place on the floor, and it was actually perfectly fine. I don't think the committee should be forced into a nominee. So whatever the wording would be that would give that latitude, that's what I would propose. As long as people are mentioning it, I'll talk about the value of a nominating committee. I mean, we have 50 members. At any given time, you really don't know how many members would be interested in volunteering their time in a specific executive position. However, when you have a nominating committee, they basically only choose from those people who come, who come to them, who ask, they ask for their names to be put forward. Whether that's done on the floor, most people will not nominate somebody who did not make it known, or they did not ask in advance as to whether or not they would be willing to serve. So I don't really have a concern about the floor or the nominating committee, because when people put themselves up for a position, they're fully prepared to give out resumes, to go for an interview, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't really know that whole process should take place from the start in front of 50 people. I don't know how efficient that would be. And most situations like this, I mean, nominating committees are very, very commonly used in all kinds of entities. So I don't think it's an unusual thing to put forward. But I guess we're going to debate that specific topic under another heading. But so I'll leave it be for the moment. But in terms of the language that permits the nominating committee a certain amount of nominees, I would say 0 to, I don't think it would be a bad idea to limit it in terms of the maximal, because you can cause mass confusion if you're allowing 7, 8, 10, and that just means that the nominating committee really didn't do a thorough enough job. So maybe we want to top it as 2 or 3, but I would certainly allow 0 as an option. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And just specifically address, not like your opinion and comments, but the point about looking at language, we will get to that. So we really wanted to, hear perspectives and, like incorporate people's opinions rather than show you the language and, what we've deemed we think should change, right? So hopefully you can appreciate that shows that we really want to make sure that the changes are reflective of what our colleagues would like to see. Can we unmute Vanessa Aronson, please? Hi, Vanessa.
Hey there. I wanted to pose a question, and I think that question has come up, that before we really think about the language and try to determine what the language was trying to say, that we first have to try to understand what the intended desire of the purpose of the nominating committee. Why was the nominating committee written in the bylaws in the first place? Now, Michelle just proposed sort of one potential reason why the nominating committee was written into the bylaws is that there's 50 members and there's a lot of information, and trying to get all 50 members all of the information about all of the candidates might be difficult, or may have been difficult in the past. I'm curious if that's still relevant today, given that we have technology and email and the ability to do things like CB8 Zooms or CB8 Speaks, or have forums where we can actually hear from all the candidates. So I think that's the reason, why we're having this philosophical question before we get to the language, is you can't debate the language if you haven't determined what the actual purpose is. When you're thinking about amending any type of law, you have to think about like what was the goal of this language, and is that goal still relevant? Again, that was the question I was going to pose to everyone, but now that we're sort of answering it in each as we speak, I do wonder if it really is necessary, or if we think that the nominating committee is to try to make this process easier or smoother. Maybe the nominating committee there's some threshold that candidates need to pass in order to be put forward by the nominating committee, but that it's not a slate. And then the last thing I just want to point out that I think is a problem with the current way we've been interpreting the language or interpreting what the nominating committee should be is that if the nominating committee is putting forth a slate, it means that anyone who's actually running cannot be part of that process because it's a closed process and you can't be on the nominating committee and run. So we're actually kind of making it harder for people to be a part of that, you know, whether it's democratic or not, but be a part of that decision-making process. You shouldn't have to give away your ability to provide input as to who our leadership should be just because you want to be one of those leadership positions. That seems crazy. So suffice it to say, I think before we can debate the language, we need to, as a board or as a committee, decide what the purpose of the nominating committee, or we need to learn if anybody has more insight as to what the purpose was supposed to be, evaluate whether or not that purpose still is relevant today, or if there's a different purpose that we want the nominating committee to hold, and then think about the language.
Thank you.
I think that's right. You're right, Vanessa, but that's what we want to get a sense of what people think, and then we can address some of the history of what's
I apologize. I just think one point you said that, you know, we should do both things at the same time because the language makes it very clear in the bylaws that to be a part of the nominating committee, you have to accept the nomination. So if you have any intention of running for office, you would say no. And hopefully people would know, you know, because it's only a couple month period, whether or not they want to seek office. But all right, well, Craig, next.
Sorry, just to address that though, my point is if someone's running for a position of secretary, that shouldn't preclude them from the ability to weigh in on who should be chair, right? That's the way it currently stands. Is if you run for any position, you're not allowed to be a part of if we're assuming that the nominating committee puts forward a slate, then we're saying anyone who wants to be any position doesn't get to give any input for any of the other positions.
Well, people can, sorry, and then I promise we won't chime in as much, but I think this is an important point. Some people have concerns about the validity of people being nominated from the floor, but people still can be. And to me, participating in the process is your vote. But I think we should keep going.
I'm just going to suggest something, and Chuck, Rebecca, or also Will, if you want to chime in and tell me if this is out of line. We have at least 10, if not more, and some repeat board members with their hands raised. I'm just wondering if the majority of board members left feel like we should actually move to have Will sort of share his screen and show the language of the current nominating committee section of the bylaws, and we actually move to amend the language, or if folks want to proceed with continuing to share their opinions.
No, I think we ought to continue because I think important question.
Fine with me. Okay, can we unmute Craig later, please?
Primary question.
Thank you, and thank you for allowing all of us to speak. I think many of us have different perspectives and lots of experience to build off of to share in this discussion. So I think giving everyone the chance to speak is really important today. As for myself, I mean, I've been on this board for 8 years and through 2 nominating committees, so I have some pretty strong feelings at this point. Just since it was just discussed a moment ago, in terms of the question about essentially excluding yourself if you have no intention of running, I guess my question is, if you happen to be on a nominating committee and then you are really unhappy with how with a candidate, why should you be excluded at that point if there's going to be an open nominating process? And I'll come back to that nominating process in a second. I also question why we're even talking about a slate. I think of slates as I think about co-op and condo boards, but generally it's a group of candidates that have come together in some way. And maybe I'm wrong about that, but that's neither here or there at this point. But getting to the core of what I want to talk about, yes, I'll agree with everyone who's talked about the current language being completely unclear. It was confusing for us this year. I think it's just confusing in general, and it's not really prescriptive. And I think that's a problem when we're trying to go through a formal process. But I think my broader feeling is, to echo some of what others said, I too question the need for a nominating committee. And it's not because of secrecy and transparency purposes necessarily, but I think it's because of a lack of functionality and the resulting divisiveness that it seems to generate. And I mean, think about it. The mere act of nominating members to be on the nominating committee is both perplexing and comical. I tell people about my experience, and they're like, wait, you have to be nominated to be on a nominating committee? It's pretty funny. And I think it puts people in a bad position. If you're nominated on the floor for the nominating committee, you have to, if no one's mentioned this in the past to you, or someone just decides spontaneously to nominate someone, you're in a difficult position. You don't want to say no, but maybe you have a reason to say no, and maybe not everyone's going to be willing to say no. So I think that is a major problem as part of this. And just going back to the whole point of nominating people on the floor, I guess my question is, you have a nominating committee, you come up with a slate, and then others can be nominated from the floor. And then this year, it turns out that it's as if we spent hours on end trying to determine who the slate of candidates should be. And then we have all these contested elections anyway. And it's not as if the nominating committee, after we were ripped apart by everyone, really had any credibility anymore, I think, in the view of people. So at that point, it was just a waste of my time and almost a waste of everyone else's time, quite possibly. I don't want to speak for others, but at least that's how I feel about it. So I don't understand why we would need to go through that exercise if we're just going to have these contested elections anyway. We could easily have, as others have suggested, all candidates be interviewed and have the responses to a set of common questions posted on the CB8 website. We can provide bios and do things to provide the transparency that I think people are looking for, and allow people to be able to compare and contrast candidates in a way where you're going to take away some of the inherent biases that I think exist now. And then I think there's a confusion as to how, as to the lack of criteria that we talk about as part of the nominating committee now. And I think one of my core concerns is, what is actually a good criteria to use? Because technically we shouldn't be talking about who's qualified or most qualified, because everyone has a different set of qualifications. Qualifications can take many different forms. And I think that's something we all really need to think about. So maybe we should, as Vanessa was discussing, think about thresholds. Maybe we want to have a minimum number of years of service on the board, and perhaps something else that is not, that allows most people to be part of that process. But beyond that, I want to just say one last thing, and I think this is important for us to think about. We have a new reality, and that's term limits. I think that's further weakened the purpose of a nominating committee, and I think we're going to see more turnover going forward. And I think people who may have it, who may wish to run for office, may want to, may have to do so sooner than they may be thinking, because they don't have now an unlimited amount of time on the board. So I think whatever we do, we need to think about the fact that our bylaws are largely antiquated, especially when it comes to the nominating committee, and we need to think about how term limits change the picture going forward. So I look forward to discussing more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Craig. Talk about antiquated. Wait till we get to the Decorum Clause that talks about sitting in a room together next to each other. Can we?
And after.
Yep. What's up?
After everyone speaks, I will explain kind of my experience, because I went through the nominating committee process after just being on the board for a few months. And And I actually think that that might be a reason why it can also be important.
Thanks, Rebecca. Can we unmute Elizabeth Ashby, please?
I too see no particular point in this. The only years and years and years ago, when the secretaries had to take minutes, it was hard to find secretaries, so the nominating committee had a purpose of going out and finding candidates. But since they no longer are stuck with that chore, we haven't got that problem. But otherwise, and I don't think that the bylaws really help us. The nominating committee does not go out and find candidates. And I find it a particularly offensive idea that the committee would choose the better candidate, the better two candidates, or whatever. I think that that's a step that we should not have. They can list the people who wish to serve, but I think that the list of people can also appear from people who are nominated from the floor. So unless somebody can think of a really good idea for having it, I can't see for the life of me why we want to continue and wouldn't work around it and just have nominations from the floor, and then people can send everything around. You know, they get vetted twice, but for no purpose as far as I could see. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Can we unmute Russell Squire, please?
Hey, thank you. So I just have two comments. I think first on the purpose of the nominating committee, I think Michelle hit it on the head. I think really it's just a matter of, if you didn't have a nominating committee, I think there's a potential for having a large number of candidates for each position. And I think the question of whether you think a nominating committee is necessary sort of comes down to whether you think that's a problem or not. But I think fundamentally that's essentially the role of the nominating committee, is to avoid that circumstance and the sort of complications that would come with that. In terms of the question of confidentiality, I mean, my understanding is that the reason that the deliberations of the nominating committee are confidential are essentially two. It's for the benefit of the members of the nominating committee, and it's for the benefit of people who go before the nominating committee. I think in the first case, when you're talking about the people who are on the nominating committee, these are people who have the job of evaluating the candidates. And obviously that's not an easy thing to do. You're evaluating your fellow board members and making judgments about them and talking about them. And I think, you know, people have to be able to do that in a sort of candid way. And I think people, it would be very difficult to do that if the deliberations were completely public. So I think, you know, if you're going to have a nominating committee, I think you need to allow it to be confidential, to give the members of the nominating committee the ability to actually, you know, do their job in a meaningful way. Because again, I just don't think if they're talking about other members of the board and fellow members of the board and all of that deliberation is public, they just really wouldn't be able to do that in a meaningful way. And then on top of that, I think it also protects people who are candidates, not in the sense that you know, people's views shouldn't be public. They should, and I think they very much do become public in the course of the process. I think it's really to essentially protect candidates who don't come out of the nominating committee. I think historically, and this came up during the meeting last year, historically, you know, if the nominating committee makes recommendations, it will make or reports, it will recommend people, and that'll be it. And ordinarily, the nominating committee doesn't say, by the way, we also considered this other person and didn't think that they were, you know, that didn't decide to recommend them. You just don't mention those people. And the fact that they may have been candidates is sort of, you know, doesn't come out from the nominating committee and wouldn't be publicly known, in part because the nominating committee deliberations are secret. So I think that's a good thing. I don't think there's really any need to make it known that somebody went into the nominating committee and wasn't successful or wasn't recommended by the committee. I think that's sort of needless, and that was an unfortunate thing that took place this year or this past year. That again was a departure from past practice, and I think really wasn't a good thing. So that's the reason for the confidentiality, and I think that all makes sense. So that was what I wanted to add.
Thank you, Russell. I have like pretty strong opinions about the confidentiality piece. Again, having been a new board member that was on the nominating committee and felt incredibly confused about why I couldn't ask anybody any questions about what was taking place. But I'm gonna spare that and move right along. If we could unmute Billy Freeland, please.
Lori, I think Lori is first.
Oh, yes, sorry, Lori. Lori Boris, please.
Or you can unmute.
Hi, yeah, hello. Well, I've had my experience with the nominating committee, both good and bad, and I choose not to speak about that tonight. But what I do want to say is I've been on a number of boards, and the only time that a nominating committee has ever been required is when there are not enough people who come forward to run for office. There was a time when the community board was in the same position. I, for one, was recruited, to join because of my work on the PTA. Scott Stringer at the time wanted to bring parents of young children into the community board process, which they've historically been not allowed, not that they're not allowed, but they've not been part of the whole process. And that was a real problem. And so he went out and recruited me, and that's how I got on the board. So it's a totally different situation today. I mean, in 2022, we have many people who want to get on community boards. Talk to the borough presidents. They'll say that like they have a lot of people who are coming forward and have, I don't know why, but they recognize that there are things to be accomplished on a community board. So I don't think that a nominating committee is necessary. I really do not. And should it become necessary, we can always, put some language in there that, if you don't have enough people to run, for the offices, you can maybe form one. But I honestly don't think that that's a problem. And we all know, like both because of technology and because we spend almost every waking minute with each other, we know like where people stand on things. And if there's a question, you can make a phone call, you can Zoom with someone, you can, there are many ways that you can find out. We don't need a separate committee. It's not like, the very, very old days where like you needed to filter through a nominating committee. So, like you needed the recommendation of the nominating committee because they had the secret sauce on, the candidates. That just isn't the case anymore. So I would agree with Vanessa and Ed and all the other people who said that we don't really need a nominating committee. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. And now, and apologies, Billy is now next.
Good evening, everybody. I think we should change the process, as I think a lot of people are saying tonight. I'm not sure we need a nominating committee, but I also would be, happy to keep one because I think there's a function it could have. Let me just make a general point. I think for this bylaws committee, it would be great if we occasionally looked at the bylaws of other community boards. I find them to be really instructive about best practices. And for tonight, I just picked out two, community board 2, on which I used to serve and which I know does, a really, really good job, and community board 7 on the Upper West Side, because, I just think, residential neighborhood right across the park, there's, a lot of similarities. And I don't mean to go into detail right now. We can look at those bylaws separately if you would all like, but they take a couple of different approaches, but what they have in common is it's a public process. And I think that's what's important. I think I went into tonight's meeting thinking, oh, I kind of like that if someone's a little shyer, they can put their name forward and don't have to worry. I actually think it's nice to know who nominates themselves. And I don't think it's a whole lot to ask. And it may, encourage people to think that there's more transparency in the process. I also want to say something. I hope no one will take any offense to this, but I hope we can all speak candidly amongst ourselves. There's a perception among some board members, I don't hold it, but I've heard it and I understand it, that some nominating committee members have a certain bent toward preferring one type of candidate or not preferring another. I think that discourages some people from seeking office. And so the less sort of power we can give to a group of people to kind of be gatekeepers, I think the better. So I'd be happy to go into what CB7 and CB2 do, but the bottom line is I think we should have a public process where people put forward nominations. I also think we should have a process where people can submit in writing what they intend to do, what they believe, a little bit about themselves, as well as a process where people can speak at a board meeting. I think it's important to give people at least 2 or 3 minutes to talk about their candidacy, not in writing, not behind an email, but talk to all of us about their candidacy. And lastly, I would like to see some mechanism for questions. I think we all have questions about the direction of the board, the number of committees, et cetera. And we should be able to ask those. I think there's a way to do it that is clean and not as uproarious as we had a couple years ago. And how might you do that? You could ask folks to submit in writing 1 question, maybe 2 maximum. You could have, if we have a nominating committee, they could screen questions and try to collect a representative sample, or you could potentially ask the district manager. This is, I think it was CB2, I believe, gives the district manager a lot of, sort of power in the nominating process, just in terms of organizing things and making sure the board gets all the information. So those are my thoughts for now, but I'd like us to look to what other boards are doing well, and I would like us to change the process in the way I've described. Okay,
Thank
thanks.
you, Billy.
Quickly, just so everyone knows, when we first got together and Taina and I became, fellow co-chairs, we went through all of the bylaws of other community boards and Gail Brewer's model bylaws, and that is really where what we thought our first, or I guess technically second, meeting would be. The reason this is so focused is because it was a clear need that we had to address what happened this election cycle. But it's definitely, I'm totally with you, something we really hope to do sooner.
Kaz?
Yeah, I'm not going to, give a long speech or story, but I think coming straight to the point, what I think we should do is eliminate the nominating committee. Anybody that wants to run for any position, they send their nomination in or their bio in. We have a whole month in which we can CB8 speaks or somehow tape the debate between the people running for different offices. Before the debate, people can submit questions. The moderator can group the questions. So that way, everybody knows who's running, what their view is. After that can be taped and anybody on the board can watch it any number of times. And the next month, just have a vote rather than go this nominating committee. And luckily I was fortunate not to be, one of the ones not to be called, but, by the nominating committee. But I think that we're just wasting time with this nominating committee and all the debates and everything going on. So my feeling is we should abolish the nominating committee, have the debates on the different positions, and let the people choose. It's open, it's transparent, and nobody has anything to hide. Anyway, I guess we'll find out what's going to go on. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kaz. Can we please unmute Barry Schneider?
Good evening and thank you. Welcome all. Very quickly, I'm in great support of the nominating committee. Remember, we're not just a gang of people who got together and decided let's have a party. we're a city agency with requirements. We share a very common bond, and the nominating committee represents the folks on the board who want to participate in prolonging what we have going for us, and they select a number of people for chair, co-chairs, and so on. I think they present a vital role. They do a vital role in keeping the community board focused on its role as a city agency doing the work of our community CD8. And I think to do away with the board without addressing the problems that we find causing us to pause, I think we have to put that aside and let's focus on the problems we have within the format we have as a nominating committee. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barry. If we could unmute Jane Partial, please.
Thank you. I'm so fascinated by this entire discussion. On the one hand, it seems to me that a lot of people want to do away with the nominating committee, and maybe there should be an up and down vote on that at the board sometime. I have been on the board for many years, probably too many, starting in 1988. To me, the nominating committee, as Michelle Birnbaum pointed out, serves as a way of screening people who are interested in devoting their time to the board. I've served on nominating committees 3 times. I've also gone before the nominating committee myself to run for secretary, which I did for 3 years. I enjoyed the process immensely, and I agree that we need a screening process, and that is what the nominating committee does. It screens candidates. And I think the situation has been exacerbated, and why we're meeting in this forum tonight is because of the COVID, and that we've never had a chance to actually be in person with each other for the last couple of years. And I might point out that Alita Camp is the perfect example of the nominating committee not working perfectly. She was nominated from the floor and became our chair. And that was after the nominating committee had met and really couldn't come up with a perfect choice. So I agree with Michelle and with Barry. I know there are term limits now, things have changed, but I am fully in support of a nominating committee. And I think that this should be the first of many meetings, because it seems to me there are a lot of philosophical differences among members of the board, and we never even see each other. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane. Michelle, I see that you're next, but since you already spoke, if that's okay, we're gonna go through folks who haven't spoken yet. So if we can please unmute Barbara Redder.
Hi. What I'm hearing.
Barbara, I'm going to kick out your phone. Wait. Barbara, I'm going to kick out your phone, or you can leave from your phone, and then I'll unmute you. Okay, let's try that now. Barbara, you have to unmute again.
I was having trouble. New computer.
Nope. Can we come back to Barbara? I'll fix this.
Okay. Can we please unmute Elaine Walsh?
Sorry, Barbara. Elaine, go
Barbara,
ahead.
we'll come back to you. Hi, Elaine.
Good evening. Hi, good evening. I'd like to make a motion and speak to it. I'd like to make a motion to eliminate the nominating committee. I've listened.
Is there a second? There needs to be. Okay, second. Ed second, and other seconds. Marco.
Ed Hartsock second. Okay.
Okay.
I've been on the board a number of years. I've chaired a nominating committee. I've been a member of the nominating committee. I think over time things have changed. One thing I see was there's no process to pass on to the next nominating committee as to procedure and what can be looked at. But I think in this time of COVID, but not just COVID, that we should respect those who would like to run and put forward their names. I'm not going to get into the process. I think that's something we can work out. But I think everyone, one, by having been appointed to the board, brings qualifications. And I've listened to a number of people who are in agreement about the nominating. And I've also listened to a few who are not in favor of eliminating the nominating committee. But I think in this day and age, we need to eliminate the committee and come up with a different structure. Let me just also say is, I find the whole process rushed. It's not given at a board meeting, a full meeting to really look at our candidates. And it's a disservice to us and to the community. So that's where I stand on eliminating the nominating committee. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And before we keep going, I would just ask everyone if they are comfortable to hold off calling to question to make sure everyone who wants to talk, because it's a big deal, has the opportunity to do so. And I think probably Chuck, I know I do, and maybe Taina has more thoughts they want to share before we vote.
Are we ready to go back to Barbara Retterwell?
We should be able to. Barbara, go ahead and unmute from your computer. Can you say something? Barbara, can you hear us?
I don't think she can hear us. You want me to move on and then we'll go back to
Yeah,
her?
come back.
Okay. I see the next few hands I see up are folks that have already spoken.
So if I would just like to, Barbara's back.
I'm just going to try to. Barbara, can you hear us?
Me?
Yeah, now we can hear
I
you.
can't hear anybody. It's a new computer and I haven't set it up yet.
We can hear.
Can you shake your head if you could hear? Okay. Yeah. From what I'm hearing, when I was able to hear on my phone, is that there is a difference between those that are more experienced on and those that are new. It used to be that I was on the nominating committee 3 times. We took it very seriously. The last time Michelle was chair, there were several people coming up for secretary. And we analyzed very quickly why one would be slightly better. It wasn't a matter that anybody was bad. And there have been other times we've examined it. I think today, first of all, it's become so divisive, and I think it was even before COVID, but it's also that we do have other means of going through the same questions and the same analysis. And I would agree with those that say that we don't need a nominating committee, even though I'm sorry, because I took the nominating committee so seriously, and I think it did such a good job of weeding out and why we picked one on the other. Nobody that came in front of us was bad. There was none of that. I wish that the secrecy was not so secret, because sometimes we had reasons without saying why somebody was bad, but why somebody was better. And I wish we were able to share it, but we weren't. So that's my comments.
Thank you so
much. Now I'll get back on my phone and hear.
Okay, so I don't think you can even hear me, but thank you for your comments. So we now have, according to like what I'm seeing, Michelle, Alita,
Marco
Tamayo. Can we unmute Marco?
Yeah, Marco.
Go ahead, Marco.
Thank you so much. I would like to call the question. Is anybody second?
Before we do that,
I would really, as I said, I think, okay.
We'd like the co-chairs would like to comment before we do that.
Yeah.
Which is what I said, and I'll just make my comments brief.
Sure.
I just want to share a little something about my experience going through the nominating committee as a candidate when I had first joined the board, and I had only been on for a few months, so nobody knew who I was, and there were multiple people applying for my role. I hope I've proven that I think I've done the role of secretary well, but I genuinely do not think there would have been any chance for a new person like me to have been elected, to become elected as a board officer without having this process. I think part of the nominating committee, while some people might disagree with if people are biased who serve on the nominating committee, I think it's supposed to be a measure against this being a popularity contest. And so I think that is another aspect that some people might not realize. But I know I never would have run initially if I didn't have that opportunity to prove my case, and for people to get to know me on 7 people instead of 50 people. when I was so new. So I had a very, very positive experience from that. Chuck?
Well, I've been on the board a long time, obviously, and I've chaired the nominating committee and been on the nominating committee. And I think first, I want to agree with what Rebecca said. If you don't have a nominating committee, you probably get down to who's known. It's a popularity contest. New members are going to be at a big disadvantage, number one. Number two, I think without a nominating committee, it would be a free-for-all. And I think there would be a lot of time taken up in terms of selecting officers. And that's the question. I mean, it's a one-year term. And how much time do 50 board members want to take up in dealing with with this? I mean, the purpose of the nominating committee, if it works well, is to first get the candidates to apply who are interested in applying, and secondly, to question those candidates. And it's not, and the questions, you know, someone suggested maybe taking some questions from board members, and that could be solicited by the nominating committee and vetted and then asked, and trying to figure out what those candidates stand for. I think the nominating committee, to do the job well, does that, and then making a judgment and making a recommendation to the full board as to who they believe is the better candidate. And I think that served us well generally over the years. And obviously, you can nominate someone from the floor if people are dissatisfied with what the nominating committee has done. But I think overall, it's worked well. And I think when you're dealing with 50 board members, and not all of whom, and I know everybody says we spend a lot of time together, but a lot of people don't get known. And I can tell you that I've always made it my business to know just about all of the board members reasonably well, but it's harder and harder, and that especially now. And I can't tell you that I have a close relationship or know well enough everybody on the board, all 50 members. I mean, a lot of them, certainly, but not all 50. So I think the nominating committee still serves a purpose, but we'll decide that. So I'll turn it over to Tina for the closing.
I share
remarks, because then we'll get back to Marco.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Chuck. I shared the beginning of my perspective, when we kicked the committee meeting off. I think all I would add is that, I think there need to be dramatic changes to bylaws in terms of the clarity of how the nominating committee functions and how it's supposed to operate and deliberate. I've shared this with Chuck and Rebecca in preparing for this meeting as a new board member that had only been on the community board for a handful of months, had literally never attended an in-person board meeting as a community board member, because I was appointed in the spring of 2020, right after the pandemic hit and we all went virtual. I do believe the nominating committee and me being nominated, frankly, because I was a new member, and I think folks on the board wanted the perspective of new members on the committee, allowed me an opportunity to be involved and engaged early on in a process where I don't think as a new board member I would have necessarily considered being a part of. However, I also felt there was a lot of lack of clarity in terms of what my role and my obligation was as a nominating committee member, and what I was able to share with anyone, because there was such a stress on the confidentiality issue, right? And so I believe I believe the nominating committee does give an opportunity for diverse perspective of opinion and a variety of different board members to participate in the process. But I think that having served on it, and again, I think that there are just flaws. There's just a lot of lack of clarity, and then with the lack of clarity as a new board member, you are then almost intimidated into feeling like you can't ask questions to anyone outside of that group, which was not a great feeling. So, but since this has been called to question and it has been seconded, I believe we need to proceed and call a vote.
Yes, I will just think it's important to note that, again, because it's an amendment, we're calling to question on the idea of getting rid of the nominating committee, but we can't actually change the bylaws until we have something to replace it. So if the vote is successful, we have to figure out what to put in its place because we need something.
Okay, why don't somebody call the roll if the questions
If
Marco
yeah,
called.
if your hand is up, you are opposed to calling the question, right? Because don't you have to vote on that?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We should vote on calling the question. All those opposed to calling the question at this point, raise their hand. Or.
And this is only for board members. I'm sorry.
Board members, yeah.
All right. I'm going to give it a second longer, but it looks like the calling the question was approved. So I'm going to lower all the hands and then ask that if you are voting no, abstaining or not voting for cause on this item, you will raise your hand now and we'll go through the roll and I'll call the names. And then following that vote, I'll call the names of everybody who's here. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Please put your hand up if you are voting no, abstaining, or not voting for cause on this. Rebecca Dengor.
No.
Michelle Birnbaum.
No.
Russell Squire.
No.
Chuck Warren.
No.
Barry Schneider.
No.
Alita Camp.
Sorry, no.
Taina.
No.
Jane.
No.
And Valerie Mason.
No.
Thank you.
Did Russell?
Last call.
I saw Rami's.
Right, yeah,
hand was
Rami
up
is
at
on.
some
Can we get
point.
Rami's vote?
Oh, Rami, go ahead. Unmute.
Abstain, please.
Okay. Sorry, Rami, I hadn't seen you. Okay, so last call. Anybody else, please raise your hand. And so I'm going to read every board member who's here. Rebecca Dengor, Taina, Chuck, Abraham, Alita, Barbara Rudder, Barry Schneider, Billy Freeland, Carolina, Cause, Craig, Ed, Elaine, Elizabeth Ashby, Jane Parshall, Lori Boris, Marco Tamayo, Michelle Birnbaum, Peter Patch, Rita Popper, Russell Squire, Sandrea Coleman, and Valerie Mason, Vanessa Aronson, and Rami. Did I miss any board members? Oh.
Looks like Ed Hartzog has his hand up.
Ed, go ahead.
Yeah, Will, you should mention everybody's last name when you call the members. I don't think you mentioned Elaine's last name or mine, but you mentioned everybody else's. I think.
Oh, no, it was not intentional.
To have everybody's last name included for the record. Thank you.
Okay. Co-chairs, do I need to recall the names?
No, I got all of the no and abstain votes, and we have it for the record. What we just need now is to make sure we have the most
Just for
up-to-date
the
total.
record, Ed requested it. Can you please, Will, if you don't mind?
Go ahead. Yeah, I will.
Thank you
Okay.
so much.
They will mostly be in the same order that I read them previously. Rebecca Dengor, Taina Barrero, Chuck Warren, Abraham Salcedo, Alita Camp, Barbara Rudder, Barry Schneider, Billy Freeland, Carolina Tejo, Cause Spagnoletti, Craig Lader, Ed Hartzog, Elaine Walsh, Elizabeth Ashby, Jane Parshall, Lori Boris, Marco Tamayo, Michelle Birnbaum, Peter Patch, Rami Siegel, Rita Popper, I have to scroll, sorry, Russell Squire, Sandrea Coleman, Valerie Mason, Vanessa Aronson. Did I miss anyone in that vote? Doesn't look like it. Great.
I do not believe so.
So while I will need to double check to make sure it's the exact, I have all the numbers correctly, it does look like the motion passed. However, it will still, the replacement and getting rid of it and adding that to our bylaws still have to go through the full board.
Well, I would, first of all, what I would suggest, if that passed, then I think we ought to just, at this point, just take it to the full board to see. And because I don't want to spend the time now to try to come up with substitute language. Let's take it to the full
I agree,
board.
Chuck. I agree, Chuck.
We still have time to do it. And I don't think we want to spend all the time. We should come up with some language and have a committee then look at it and see what makes sense. So maybe we should just go on to the number 2 item.
All right. Do you want to take the lead on that one, Rebecca?
Sure. So I spent a lot of time, as I mentioned earlier, reading all the bylaws of other boards and reading Gail Brewer's model bylaws, which, you know, I think she had written because she thought bylaws should be reviewed more consistently by all the boards. And in her model bylaws, there was a decorum clause that I actually thought was something that sounded great as an addition to our bylaws. I think it's a reminder of the fact that in order to work successfully as a board, we have to be civil with each other. It's a reminder that we conduct our business in the public, and we should expect a certain level of decorum because of that. And I can read you the language from the model, or I can send Will to put in the chat the language from her model bylaws, but that's kind of where this idea came about. It's just a reminder of the importance of what we do and that we owe it to other people to treat them with respect. But I don't know if my other co-chairs
Didn't we
had any?
We had some other language, I thought. Rebecca, do you have the latest language that we talked about? I'd rather put that.
Yeah, we can send both.
I'm happy to read it. Is it helpful to read it?
Yeah.
Or do we want to actually like share our screens?
You can share your screen if that's easy for you.
Define easy. Hold on.
Less than difficult.
It's not. It is slightly less than difficult. Hold on. I don't have it like in a Google Doc or anything. Hold on. Just bear with me.
If you can email it to me, I can also put it up.
Yep, that's what I'm doing.
Email it to Will, let him put it up. He's the expert.
That's what I'm doing. Come on, Chuck.
That's what we're paying him the big bucks for.
Right. Okay, well, I just sent it to you.
All right, give me 2 seconds.
Thank you all, and thanks everyone for your patience.
Okay, everybody should be able to see it now. You guys can see it, yes?
Alita?
Can people see it? Is it big enough?
I can
we
make
unmute
things.
Alita?
Go ahead.
You did. Thank you. My concern is that the decorum language is not broad enough. If there is no, my issue with the nominating committee, in addition to the reason that I mentioned earlier, is that people can come on the nominating committee already having decided who should be chair based on conversations and calls that occur before the nominating committee is convened. So my comment, I know that we had a vote on that, and I have a side question, which is, what if there are no procedures agreed to? So ultimately, but my question, my point is that the election, I'm not so sure about this year, but the previous year was pretty ugly. I stayed out of it because I was chair at the time, but I heard from a lot of people about calls that were made. And this year there were some accusations as well that were made about people supporting one candidate or the other. And it's that kind of stuff, and people agreeing to vote for somebody and then not believing that they can change their mind when they get a call from someone else who they may prefer. Because I heard that, and again, I know that this is hearsay in a legal context, but I heard that there were people who decided to vote for someone based on an initial call. And even though they liked someone better, felt that they could not change their vote because they had already committed. And that's a problem. And it's a problem if these calls start now or start in June or start in July. And I don't know how you deal with that, because you can't really legislate appropriate behavior. We've seen that on a national level, that doesn't work, but and a state and a city level. But there really are, for me, concerns about the back end stuff, the calls that are made and the conversations and accusations and deliberate omissions or questions. I think there need to be a lot of procedures about decorum, about civility, and to set the board in a different frame of mind. There's polarization, and that leads to comments and attitude and behavior to support one point of view or one person. And I think it's only been exacerbated because of Zoom. We don't have the ability to chat with anyone. We don't have the ability to see that someone is really nice. I learned so much about board members when I was calling people when I was campaigning for chair. And I have to say that I really liked everyone that I spoke to, but things were really different. I don't think the person I was running against said all this stuff about me or about that person that had been said this year and last year. And that really gives me a great deal of cause for concern, is the idea of wrangling people to support based on information that may not be fully accurate, or based on maybe not full truths about someone else, and then a reluctance on people's parts to change their mind. So I think to not have the nominating committee, there need to be a lot of procedures, or a lot of I don't know if it's wishful thinking or what, but to set in motion the idea that they should be clean campaigns, the high road should be taken, and that people understand they can change their minds if they want to. I don't know. It's something that really concerns me, and the inability to get to know people, to chat with people, to sit next to people, I think is a real loss for the board. So maybe there are more opportunities for casual conversations beyond, maybe there should be a social hour or something for people just to get to know each other again, because we have had a lot of turnover, maybe at least a quarter of the board over the last 2 years, of people who've only been able to see everyone on Zoom. And I think it's kind of part and parcel of the issues that I have with the campaigns, is that we don't really get to know each other, and we don't really get to see that people are more than just the way they vote, or even that they don't vote and they don't speak up. And so I guess that's what I have to say. Thanks for your patience.
Alita, I can just say, I know that this has been a concern of yours, and it's a very difficult thing to deal with, as you yourself recognize, because when you get into these elections, people get stirred up. But what we've tried to do here is just sort of throw out, and then if you take a look at item number 2, that's something that goes beyond just decorum at meetings, but it goes about the interactions between board members, both in meetings and outside of meetings. And that's what we try. Take a look at that language. And it's, it's very hard to tell people how they can behave, obviously, but we tried to put in a few general guidelines. And that's what that was our idea.
And I see the part about treating I know that, and I see the part about treating each other with respect and 100% endorse something like that. But I think there just need to be certain procedures, maybe about questions and answers or Zoom opportunities, so that it's important, these roles of leadership for the board and the board members, especially, well, for anybody, whether they're new or not, should have the opportunity to really understand what people are like. And so it's all part of it, I suppose, and transparency and honesty in both your representations and those about opponents are, it's important to do that. So maybe I would add something, and again, you can't mandate stuff, you can't mandate behavior, you can't mandate attitude, but maybe with continued emphasis on civility, on transparency, it becomes a cultural thing, so that when people are disrespectful or discourteous, we're not transparent, it's unaccepted. And maybe that's something, I don't know. I just don't know, but thanks for your patience, and thanks, Chuck, for offering that. I know you, I think you and I have had conversation.
Yeah, go aahead, Rebecca.
Sorry.
I think this is a entry point into continuing that conversation. But this is, to me, is a great way to get it started. Michelle?
Yeah, I'd like to comment on this, but also make a comment afterwards. I think this looks perfectly fine. We're not 5 years old. You can't control every word that comes out of everybody else's mouth. You also can't anticipate what circumstances will inhibit people from speaking or will encourage people for speaking. People have their different personalities. If somebody is too inhibited to make a comment, and the forum is a public one or a welcoming one or a polite one, and they can't bring themselves to make a comment, that rests with them. We can't account for everybody's personality under every circumstance. With respect to number 2 here, I would just also add that divergent opinions be respected, and that committee chairs be respectful of the public before them. I won't go into why I'm making that remark, but suffice it to say, I think it would be helpful if it were in here. Otherwise, this looks perfectly fine. I was going to make an additional comment on the, nominating committee, and I just want to say, I understand everybody's point of view, and I'm not really married to it, but I'm disappointed that it was voted on that way tonight, because I really don't think it was given due consideration. We did hear everybody's opinion, but that's not an interactive conversation to hear people's opinions. Sometimes people's opinions can be changed, or if you offer another opinion, it can counteract what somebody else says, but there's a lot that was not under consideration here. I happen to agree point for point with everything that Russell said. I think the privacy, I'm sad that we attributed some sinister reason to the privacy and confidentiality. In fact, it was as much to protect the applicants as it was anything else, to shield them from any kind of what they may perceive as embarrassment, and that they just come to the committee forthright, offering, what they have to offer. And I've been on the board 16 years. I have never seen a circumstance like the one that happened last year. And I think that's an outlier. I don't think that should happen again. I don't think that will happen again. And part of the reason it happened was because the committee did not respect the confidentiality. To this day, when I chaired a committee, the members of this board do not know from me anyway, who ran for the positions that were open. If an applicant wants to tell everybody that they're running or that they saw the committee, that's their business. But it never came from me, and I don't think it should come from anybody else. I think that's a matter of respect. The other thing I don't think you considered is, you know, when you have nominations from the floor and you don't have a nominating committee, you will not necessarily elect an officer with a majority. You may have votes now that can be split against 10, you know, candidates, and you won't have a majority for the election of any one of them. So there's a lot that has to be said about this, and I'm very disappointed that you took a vote. I don't demean anybody's opinion. I understand why this has come up, but I want to stress that this last one was an outlier. And I also want to say that I don't think this was taken up under enough consideration tonight. And I'd like you to think about that. And especially to replace it with something which now we know is nothing, because we don't have anything to replace it with. We now have to construct something to replace it with. We have no idea as to whether or not we can or will be able to address any of the pitfalls that have been addressed with having the nominating committee. So I'm very worried about this. I'm sorry about it. And at any rate, we go forward from here. It is what it is. But those are my regrets, and I have many other reasons in terms of what actually, you know, would end up being the construct here. But anyway, to what's in front of us on the screen at this moment in time, I would ask that those 2 points be added if the chairs are in agreement.
Can you specify the exact 2 points, Michelle? And just
Sure.
Sure. Okay. If you could please do that first.
Sure. To tag on to your last line, we don't have to do a whole big reconstruction of this, you know, where it says members should treat all members of the public and applicants appearing at the board with similar courtesy and respect. And members and the public should respect divergent points of view. And chairs of committees should show due respect for not only their committees, but the public that comes before them.
Thank you. And just to address the points that you made, I'm not going to say whether I agree or disagree, but the reality is that there was a motion made, it was called to question, it was seconded, we had to take a vote.
On the decorum?
No, not
No, I'm talking about the decorum. I'm talking about the paragraphs in front of us.
Yeah,
we haven't had a vote on this.
No.
Yeah, you just spent the majority of the time that you just spoke talking about item agenda 1, which we have already moved on from.
Yes, yeah, and I don't expect any change, which I believe I said. I said we
but
are
you
where we are.
commented on why we called it to question, and I am explaining and responding on behalf of the committee.
Oh, okay. No,
okay?
fine. I didn't comment on why. I just commented that I was disappointed, not on why. I said I understood fully what everybody meant. But what I'm addressing now, because I think this is the topic at hand at the moment, is what I would like to see added to the decorum at meetings.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah. And I would also just say that I think we also tried to be as clear as we could that we were asking people not to call to question so quickly on such a big item, but unfortunately we have to follow Robert's rules.
Can I just point out that this is obviously a committee recommendation, has to go before the full board, and I'm sure this is something that will be very vigorously debated, and I'm sure Russell will make sure that all opinions will be heard.
Absolutely. Can we please unmute at Hardstock to talk about item number 2, decorum clause?
Let's talk about item 2. Exactly.
Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, Taina. Thanks, Rebecca. So to move this along for you all, I'm ambivalent about some of it. I support some of it, and I have something for maybe new business. But listen, I decorum and civility. Listen, who can't be for that? It's like that old ad from the 70s, right? Mom, apple pie, and Chevrolet. Sorry for the cheap plug for Chevrolet, but I mean, I'm all for that. A little bit, as I think all of us are. It's sad. I personally think it's sad, if I may, that the borough president feels it necessary to have to remind us to be adults and act with some level of manners. But, you know, that's the life in the world we live in today. As for decorum, yeah, I mean, coming from Virginia to New York, some of my friends, my parents, my father from South Carolina used to wonder, you know, what the heck, man? Like, that's, you know, I raised you, you know, to be genteel, whatever. It's what I enjoyed about New York City, is that everybody was very upfront. I used to tell them, I said, I love that, you know, the sort of frankness. And frankly, 10 years ago, when I joined this board, 11 years ago, I mean, yeah, frankly, for those of you, I personally found it a little rougher, a little more rough and tumble, frankly. When I came to visit, you know, it wasn't so much as I'm rubber and you're glue, but whatever the case may be, what I'm getting at is it's sort of a sad commentary. I support the idea. I think it's kind of tough how to tell people how to act. I think it could be, you know, an admonishment. The other thing is with this particular item, to be specific here, sitting next to each other. I'm really against that, frankly. I know Alita used to push that, and I used to push back. Alita knows that. You know, sit in the front, sit in the front. Well, here's the thing. When you're sitting at the blood center, as opposed on these Zoom calls, people know who the board members are, because at some point you are going to vote. And then when we've gone into executive session, people can find you. So if you're sitting in the back of the room, per se, the chair, especially at the blood center, they can see you. In fact, they can see you probably better. And also the members of the public, I would just say that they can come to you much easier than having to, say, move all the way down to the front. So it's just one humble opinion on that particular point. And I would posit with respect to one particular phrase in paragraph 2 of what's before us. I'll make 2 comments, and one I would reserve for something that Chuck talked about before on the last matter. Everybody's all going a little, I think, a little overboard about the abolishment of the nominating committee, in that I think we'll be able to come up with something probably better. We're all pretty smart here. And I think Chuck alluded to that before. But to build on that, the particular phrase I'm talking about is this. About 4 lines down, members should treat each other with courtesy and respect in meetings and in other interactions. Thank you, whoever's doing that, outside of meetings. Whoever did that, thank you. 2 quick examples from my time on this board, and I'll just leave you with that. Thank you very much, whoever did that. So when I joined this board, and many of you have heard this story before privately, it'll be amended for public consumption, but I feel it's appropriate here in this forum to share it for new members and old who may not have heard it. When I joined this board 10, 11 years ago, many of you will find this hard to believe. I never said a word for 9 months. And then I spoke out on a matter that was before this board. It was quite contentious. It was quite surprising. And nevertheless, we had a long discussion of this particular matter over a series of meetings. And during one particular meeting, as a new member, I found the attorney representing the applicant to be less than forthcoming. And as many of you know, and many of you are attorneys, you do know as members of the bar that we are all officers of the court at all times, especially now as we serve, as we do, on a, and as Barry, thank you for pointing out so much, that we are part of a public agency. So I took umbrage at this particular attorney's reticence in conveying their particular knowledge about the procedures of an administrative agency. Nevertheless, that had never been done before. People were quite aghast. Fast forward about 2 months, an unrelated committee meeting later at another location ended, and everyone had filed out of the room save for 2 particular members who stayed behind and asked me to remain. These particular members of our board then proceeded to remind me or advise me in no uncertain terms that I was, quote, quite lucky that other members of the board were not present, as I would have been removed. Now, because they did not take kindly to me talking to this individual of the public the way I did. Needless to say, as an attorney, I believe that I had every right as a member of a public agency to question the applicant the way I did. There was nothing wrong with it. I was not admonished by the Bar Association. No one called me and said I couldn't do what I needed to do as a public meeting. The point is, the applicant actually came back and addressed the issues I had raised with them. So that tells you anything about the exchange. What I'm getting at, though, is the implicit threat. Now, as a new member, if I didn't know better, or as someone who practices administrative law and knew particularly that these members could not carry out that threat, I sort of laughed, and at the end of the day, the application didn't succeed. So the point being, though, I think that this is an important point that's being made by the borough president, and I think that with respect to that, we should have some sort of procedure for situations like that going forward, because new members might not know that this can't be done. And as Craig pointed out very eloquently, we do have term limits, and I do think we should be looking forward as to that. And secondly, as another example related to that, there was indeed another application several years later that came before this board. It was, as some are, quite contentious. Long story short, a lot of people were involved in that particular matter, and there were several phone calls placed. I can only speak to one placed to me, but I'd heard from others. Again, this is hearsay. We're not in court, though. That there were rumblings that if you voted one way or the other, it wouldn't be good for you. Look, whatever. My point is, this is nonsense, and I would use a different word. I think you know what it is, 2 syllables. And I think that we should, when addressing this, maybe in a group later, put in some procedures so that people can then take their concerns. And this, I believe, is where confidentiality would be very good, that someone could go confidentiality wise to the general counsel of the borough president's office and raise such an issue. Now, that may be the case now, and if it is, maybe to our points earlier in this meeting about clarification and certainty and precision, maybe we could actually enunciate that in the rules so that it wouldn't have to be sort of implied going forward as to that it is what we meant. And that's all I have to say about it. Sorry to go long.
I'm just a clarifying question. Enunciate what?
Just the fact that, you know, you're able to go via these procedures to, say, the general counsel's office. I mean, I think we have these procedures in place now about maybe other matters, but I think if we're talking about, you know, addressing things later on, which I think we were, as to especially replacing the nominating committee, maybe that could be taken up later, you know, as added language, you know, sort of building off what we have here.
Got it.
If we adopt that, you know what I'm saying? Again, just food for thought. It's nothing in specific, just adding to the discussion. And actually, I'm done. So thanks.
Thank you so much. Can we unmute Craig?
Thank you. A few quick things. One, just going back to, I think, what Michelle raised in terms of if we were to not have a nominating committee and we have a lot of potential nominees, ranked choice voting. I'll just leave it at that. Now coming back to decorum. So I guess the first item, the first paragraph, it's not really decorum, but it's fine, it's reasonable. The rest of it, I think my issue is that it's basically toothless. It's just a bunch of empty words that's basically not enforceable. And yeah, we should all strive to do that. I think everyone agrees on that. But what does that actually mean? And is it going to make any difference? And I just don't know that we should be doing something just for the sake of feeling good about ourselves, put language in there if it's not really going to matter to people. And that's where I wonder whether we need to actually have something that has teeth to it. And if we were to do that, I also think part of the decorum is a few things that I think we see all too often here. One is being respectful of how discussions are going and not calling to question prematurely, let's say, when we know that there are other people who haven't had a chance to speak, when we know that the discussion is still very vigorous and meaningful and relevant. I think there are times where that opportunity is taken when it's inappropriate. And I think the other thing that some people sometimes do that is a decorum issue is not respecting people's time and time limits and constraints that people have. And I think we should be considering how we can actually have meetings be more efficient. And part of that is, I think, the decorum of respecting people's time. Finally, the other thing in the second paragraph is I take real exception to the first sentence because I think it's discriminatory. I think in an in-person meeting, for example, there are many people who, if you were to try to limit private discourse, would just end up texting one another. And there are certain people who may not be able to do that for whatever reason. And I think that it would really cause more problems than it would solve to have language like that in there. So I would strongly suggest that if we were to move forward with this, that we eliminate that first sentence of number 2. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Craig. And just a clarifying question to my co-chairs, Chuck and Rebecca. I believe this is model, but was that first line not the actual first line in the model decorum language from the borough president?
Yeah, so that line is directly from what kind of Gail was hoping would be passed by every board, and the other part that was from her original is about the when meetings are held in person, members shall, where the entire first part is also directly from her, what she kind of wanted all boards to have, if that's helpful for context.
Thank you. That's what I thought. Craig, I'm not trying to imply that we need to accept that, but that is where that first line came from.
No, I can appreciate that, but upon my reading it, that was my first instinctive reaction, that there are some people who may be put at a disadvantage with language such as that.
Fair. Thank you so much for your comments. Can we please unmute Barbara Redder?
Craig, before Barbara says something, I just want to address something that Craig said. First, you cannot lay out specific rules that tell people how to act and expect them to be followed. And you can't say, and the question is, well, what's the penalty? I mean, are we going to, if someone violates the rules, are we going to expel them from the board? You can remove a member for cause, that's in the charter. But, we're not, the only time that I know that that's ever come up is from lack of attendance, which is not an issue, fortunately, right now. So, but I think it does, years ago, Barry Schneider was at this meeting. He's the first one that put on, when he became chair, and this is over 20 years ago now, he put civility up on the podium when we were having in-person meetings. And he was the first one to do that. And I think it helps. It's just a reminder. It's just, we have a standard. This is something that the board thinks is an appropriate way to behave. And look, you think it's bad here. Yeah, thank you. There's a sign like that. You think it's bad here. You should see some of these other boards. I mean, they are yelling and screaming at applicants and at each other. So, I mean, this is New York, as Ed Hartzog was making the point. And so I think what we're trying to do here, and look, the committee, obviously everybody should have their say, but I think what we're trying to do here is just say, okay, look, here's some things that are fairly obvious, but I think if you have them in there, you can at least say, look, this is what the bylaws say. This is a standard you ought to try to meet. Is everybody going to meet it? No, of course not. But it's one of those things, you try the best you can. And I don't think we could ever say people who violate this, I mean, what's the penalty? I mean, there's no penalty. I mean, everybody's got a right to vote. Everybody's got a right to speak. You only hope they do it in a way that, respects others. And so we're just trying to reinforce that. I don't think that's, I think, our point. That was what we were thinking about.
The question is, does it belong in bylaws? Is it a bylaw that we
well, where would you put it?
I guess
one
that's technical, but
what defines our behavior as a group? I mean, what should right?
Right, but a bylaw suggests a law, something that we must follow, and that's, I guess, where
I know it's tough for you, Greg. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm just stubborn.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, can we just unmute Barbara Redder?
Thank you.
I am muted, I think, aren't I?
Yeah.
Can you hear us now?
Well, I have two very quick ones. One, Chuck, I was going to say that I came on with David Liston, who had the sign civility, and I found out years later that he took it from Barry. So I remember that sign, and it did something. I don't know what else. The other, I think it's in the bylaws, if not maybe, that I think the chairs have a chance, either the chair of the community board or the chair of the committees have a chance of saying you called the question too soon. We have done that where somebody's, when there were too many other hands up. Very often there are many hands up after a half hour or 45 minutes of discussion. The feeling is we've heard all there is to hear, and so on. So that's a second point. I don't know if that's something that could be put in the bylaws to say that there is a discretion to do that. The third point, and I promised that I raised my hand before there was this a previous discussion, but what I hear very often from usually only 3 or 4 or 5 people is that after a vote is taken, we have long discussions and back and forth, and then a vote is taken, and after the vote is taken, we have to hear somebody that readdresses it again. That not only extends the meeting, there's something agitating. I don't like it when my vote doesn't make it, when somebody votes against what I want. But you know what? We're big people, and that's what this is. And I wish there was something under decorum, I think, that says once a vote is taken, we do not readdress it with the next agenda item, after the next agenda item.
Barbara, can I just say, in the context, in your last question, that's really in Robert's Rules of Order. That's okay. The rules are basically, and I think Russell tries to, most of the chairs try to enforce that once you've gone past an item, that's it. There's no further discussion that's really allowed on an issue that's been decided. And so I think
wish it was part of decorum also, because I consider it a lacking of decorum when people do it.
It is, but it's also against the rules, and I think the chair generally tries to do that. Sorry, go ahead.
Barbara, are you done with your comments, or?
That's my comments.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your.
I should come back again.
Okay, I appreciate your perspective, and I have to just say, like, I think that there are moments, like as a full board, where it's like Robert's Rules of Orders come in like direct conflict with what I feel is like just appropriate, respectful behavior. But and I think that parliamentary procedure wins every time. But I do agree, and I think that there are times when newer board members, counting myself in that, I'm approaching the end of my first term, but where there's like confusion, and then or just like a clarifying question and not opportunities to ask those. So again, if we could unmute Valerie Mason. Hi, Valerie.
Thanks. Well, I appreciate this. And I think some of my comments were kind of addressed by others, but I guess I would see this as not, to sort of Craig's point, not actually a bylaw. The way I've seen these incorporated is it usually says something like bylaws and rules of decorum. And I think in terms of what's there, I mean, first I have a question for Rebecca. In the bylaws that you reviewed, did you see these provisions?
Yes, so I will read to everyone exactly what we took from Gail's model bylaws, and then you'll be able to see that.
No, she's talking about the ones that we compared to other boards.
Yeah, I'm asking.
So I did.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I had wanted actually for us to have a meeting about this, like after last year's or 2 years, the election, the first Zoom election. So when I reviewed all the bylaws, it was quite long ago, but before the full board meeting, when we vote on things, I will list any other board member, community boards that have incorporated this, if that's helpful. I just don't have that anymore at the top of my head.
Okay, so I guess, okay, so I'm not sure. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think there can be rules of decorum. I don't think it should just be limited to the board. I mean, these are rules which affect the administration of the meeting. And I think to Chuck's point, I mean, I think, you know, at the beginning of a meeting, I mean, I think Russell typically, if it's and any other chair usually says, you know, we're going to limit your comments to 2 minutes or whatever the rules are. And it should just be something that applies to everyone who attends a meeting. And I think that in terms of, people are, but I think that it should be something along the lines of if you're, the chair or the head of the committee, the chair of the board or the head of any of the committees are running the meetings. And if people are getting out of line, whether it's because they're going back to a previous agenda item or, some other thing, that's the chair, that is the prerogative of the chair to stop that comment or discourse. And that's why we have chairs of meetings, because they are running the meetings. And as long as the rules of the meetings are set out at the beginning of the meeting, then everybody's on the same playing field and knows the rules. And while I think I can't, for some reason on my screen right now, I can't see what you guys are proposing up front, but I think it says something like, you can't talk. I think that sometimes, especially when we're in a meeting to all together, I don't think it should be, if this is what we're going to consider something just completely prohibited, it should be something like, discourse kept to a minimum so as not to interfere or interrupt. Because, there are times when someone will come and ask a question. Typically just, you make an announcement, go to the back of the room or something, but somebody may have a minor comment or, comes up to a board member to speak. So I wouldn't want to eliminate all conversation. I would think, so I guess what I'm saying is I'm not against the rules of decorum, but I think it's something that could have a little bit more teeth in that if you're either going beyond that the chair reserves the right to stop anyone who's not following the rules or is not conducting themselves appropriately. So that people and we shouldn't, and it shouldn't just be for members of the board, it should be for anybody who's coming to the meeting. And if it's posted on our website, people will be able to see it. They will know the rules of the road going in. And I think it will actually lead to, we're talking about decorum, but I think it will actually lead to what we're all trying to gain is more streamlined, directed, meetings. Because one of the comments in decorum should be that all comments should be related to the subject at hand and not any, and that remarks are directed towards the chair and unless it's a point of personal privilege or something along those lines. So thanks very much for listening. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Valerie.
Valerie, just a point to that. The chair has that. The chair has that authority right now. If the chair is running the meeting, I was chair for 3 years, and I always would say, hey, that's that's not appropriate, that's out of order, and put in silence someone if they tried to do that. And I think chairs have done that over the years.
I think so, but I think, I think one of the things that is sort of a recurring theme here is that, sometimes you have standing rules for committee and some maybe, a new chair. As I've always said, you guys conduct great meetings at, the transportation meetings and keep people pretty much on topic, et cetera. So all I'm saying is if it's there and somebody may not actually be familiar with Robert's Rules of Order or how a general, we get a lot of, first timers that come to our meetings. We don't ring a bell, but, they don't know the rules. And so anything that we can put out there to give them guidance that, they're going to have 2 minutes, they've got to keep on topic, and that once an item is addressed, that's the end of it. I think would help foster participation and keep the meetings moving as efficiently and quickly as possible.
Okay, well, maybe there ought to be a way to, maybe there ought to be some kind of, when after new board members come on or new chairs and stuff, every once a year, there ought to be some kind of a meeting just to talk about general procedures of running committee meetings and board.
Yeah, well, you see it when we've had bike meetings, Chuck. People come and they think, when we were looking at, placement of city bike stations, we had all these people, they don't even understand the executive session piece, meaning why, the member that they can continue to comment, but only through comment into the, through going up to a board member. I know that when I first started to attend meetings, I didn't understand that concept. I didn't see it anywhere. And at that time, I think the only way I knew it was Jane Parshall came over and told me, because I was like running around like a lunatic, but and understand the rules. And this way people don't get frustrated either, because they don't understand that we don't make a lot of times we're just taking opinion and we're not making decisions, and they get extremely frustrated. And I think that reflects, poorly on us in terms of the institution, that people get frustrated and don't come back. So I think, again, I'm seeing these as rules of decorum, but I think, it's something we can adopt. It doesn't have to be part of the bylaws, but I think in general, I would even call it like, rules of the road and conduct of the meeting, so that somebody can go to our website and see how it all plays out. And it will give the chair, when the chair shuts someone down and somebody complains, and you can have something in writing where the chair says, look, you didn't act appropriately, and here it is in black and white. I have the authority to shut you down. And I think it just gives the chair, either of, the board or whatever, whichever committee, at least, authority in writing that they can point to.
Yeah, no, that's certainly a thought. Maybe so to get the public more in tune with the way meetings are going to be run.
And it's not just the public. I will just add, and then I want to move on because I really don't want to take up too much space time here. But again, as the only one of us, of the three of us co-chairs I literally joined the board after the pandemic had hit and we were in lockdown. I have had only one in-person community board meeting, which was the one we had at the Hunter Campus Schools in the summer of last year in July. So my first meeting and every single one of my meetings, committees and full boards, has been virtual, with the exception of one. It is not just members of the public, it is new members as well, right? The way we choose to run our meetings as Community Board 8 is actually different than the way other boards choose to run it. We have chosen to ensure that every community board member is muted unless they raise their hand or are called on or are chairing a meeting. That is not how every board in this city runs. Other boards, including across Central Park on the Upper West Side, have every single community board member unmuted, which means that if a new board member has a question or wants to jump in or has a clarification or wants to raise their hand, not to vote for or against, but just because they're not sure what's happening, they can do that. We currently do not have a mechanism to do that. And I don't mean to bring in my very personal opinion into this as co-chair, because I would like to be unbiased, but it is problematic and it is incredibly frustrating. And so it isn't just about, in my mind, decorum and sort of how we think about this. It is how we treat each other. It is how we treat members of the public that come and give us their opinion and present. It is how we treat developers that come and present to us because they have a ULIP in front of us, and restaurant owners that are applying for a liquor license. But I just want to be mindful, to be clear, that it is a problem for those of us who are in our first term and have only attended board meetings on Zoom. So I just wanted to say that. Now I think we can unmute Rita Popper.
Hi, guys. I've been on the board more years than I can even count. But at any rate, we have come up against something new in this board. When I came on the board, it was in the middle of David Liston's chairmanship, and nobody opposed him. And then Nick Biest became the chairman, and nobody opposed him. And then Jackie Ludoff became the chair, and nobody opposed her. And then Jim Kleins became the chair, and nobody opposed him. So what we have entered into a new phase that we have to learn to work around. I would like to come back to that in one second. What I think tonight, what we can do constructively is we do have a situation on the board now that we have never had before. And that is that the first vice chair is no longer the first vice chair. And there are no rules that can say that the second vice chair can step up to be the first vice chair. And I don't know if we have an election for the second vice chair, but we have to assume that everybody can be it. That is something I think that we can do tonight. If we have opinions about and put them into writing and we all push them together, maybe we'll come up with something instead of sitting here and taking every word apart. What does this mean to me? And what does this mean to me? It is up to the people who appoint us to assume that we are competent and that we know how to conduct ourselves. That doesn't mean we haven't lost our temper ever so often. But we had a situation last year, and the campaigning that went on, it became a campaign, a regular campaign, whereas all the people I just mentioned, there was no campaigning. Nobody opposed them. And so therefore, the secrecy of the nominating committee, there was no secrecy, and there was nothing to tell anybody about. So I think nothing is being settled about, other than that we voted on not having a nominating committee, but we need to have a process for the nomination. But I would like to bring up, how would you like to handle the vacancy of the first vice chair and moving up the second vice chair to first vice chair?
So with all due respect, Rita and Chuck, Rebecca chime in, but I think, can you just re-bring that up during new business?
Yeah, I think we should. Rita, bring that up under new business. Let's try to see if we can, we're talking about this decorum issue. If we could get that settled, then we're out of business and we can go to new business and old business and stuff. And if we were, and we'll
Chuck,
discuss.
I'm sure that when you, Barbara, and Barry ran, you also ran unopposed. How do you want to handle, because we could be here all night talking about this, but how do you want to handle that? What will be in place of a nominating committee and how it should?
Rita, if we can just let's do one thing. First, we took a vote here and the committee said, this group here said, we want to do away with the nominating committee by majority vote.
So
that's going to come up before the full board. If that passes, then we'll have to figure out a procedure. And that's going to take a little more time because there are a lot of issues involved. So let's take one thing at a time. Let's see what happens at the full board. And then if the full board ratifies the decision that was made tonight, then we'll come up with procedures and we'll have a committee meeting about it. And we'll recommend some procedures to the full board to handle the new way of doing nominations and elections.
Great. So what are we discussing now?
We're still talking about the Decorum Clause, which is item 2 on the agenda. And so I don't mean to dismiss your very fair question and point. I'm just asking that you bring it up again during new business, which will probably happen shortly unless 11 more hands raise. We only have 2 more people with raised hands. So is that okay, Rita?
Okay.
Thank you so much, Rita. Can we please unmute Billy Freeland?
I'd like to make a motion to approve adding this language to our bylaws and with some modification. If there's a second, I could speak to that.
Is there a second?
Barry seconded.
Okay, seconds.
So my motion to approve is essentially to keep this language as is with a couple modifications. One is I would change the line about private discourse to say something, and I know we can kind of rework this language a little bit later, but basically to say, members shall endeavor to refrain from engaging in private discourse or committing any other act tending to distract, etc., except discussion regarding a matter germane to what's immediately before the board. I don't want people to feel that they can't ask a question of their colleague or get an opinion or clarify. I think those discussions are extremely important and productive in our board. The second thing I would change here is I would add
Billy, on that though, with minimum disruption, something like that, with minimum.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, I mean that seems, I don't know. For me, that's
fine with me.
Fine with me.
Back in, Taina. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
And then the second change would just be to add that members and the public should also treat board staff with respect.
Very, yeah.
Was that mentioned? Forgive me.
Very welcome.
Yes.
Okay.
No, we need to add that. That was
Thank you,
a slip up of ours.
And so that would be my motion to basically approve this, but with those changes.
Okay.
We had a second.
Are there comments or second? We had a second on that. Yeah. Are there anybody else want to comment on that? On Billy's motion? Are we ready to vote?
You still have
We have
Lori.
Barry. Yep. Lori, Rita, Barry, Michelle, and Elaine. Nope, not Elaine. Michelle have their hand.
I think she's having problems with her computer, so you should probably assume that Elaine wants her hand to be up.
Elaine, can you just nod your head if you're trying to? Okay, great. Okay, Elaine as well.
Okay. Okay, but just very briefly, I took to heart what Taina said about the meetings being open, like having the microphones, everybody being unmuted. And I just wanted to say that I teach second graders on Zoom, and when they are used to being muted, because in all of their regular school classes, I guess, they are required to be muted unless they have a question and they want to raise their hand. But I don't support that. And so I always tell them, I want you to unmute, but you have to be respectful of the fact that if more than one person talks at a time, then no one gets heard. So these second graders who are 7 years old and 8 years old and some 9-year-olds have all learned how to behave on Zoom. And I think that the rest of us as grownups can also learn how to behave on Zoom. So I would agree with Taina that that we should, and I don't know if you want to make a friendly amendment or whatever, but I think that this question needs to be addressed, because I don't think Zoom is going anywhere in the near future. And you're right that people don't feel like they can. I don't even feel like I can break through and say something if I just have a question. It's like there's no way to say what you have to say in a meeting. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
I just to comment briefly, I think if we want to add something that's a Zoom specific rule, because again, we don't know whether or not we're going to continue yet. If that is the direction the committee wants to go in, I would ask that it be a separate item and like a separate new number, and it be voted on separately, because I think that's a more complicated topic that people who might be in favor of a reminder on decorum won't want to support.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Is Rita next?
Just a point of information, Chuck.
Yeah.
Does any of this decorum of meetings and does it talk about private meeting? I'm concerned about the private meeting law. We had a lecture on that, and
the open meeting law. You mean? No, I think they're just talking about, the way I understand it is just discussions when you're in a meeting, and it would be when we're in altogether, when people chat with each other privately.
Not
And
privately.
That's all.
I will tell you that other boards, and including Gail's model bylaws, had a separate clause about open meetings as a reminder, but we can discuss having that added at a separate time. But I think it's the law, we have to follow it.
Right.
The bylaws kind of more specifically address our board.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Michelle, I guess, is next. Right.
Yeah, she is.
Yeah, I just wanted some clarification of Billy's proposed resolution. Did he specifically not want to add the 2 sentences that I proposed? Was that intentional?
I don't know, Billy.
Billy, I think we should unmute him.
We unmute Billy.
Go ahead, Billy.
Yeah, forgive me, Michelle.
And
I recall somewhat what you suggested, but honestly, it just slipped my mind. Can you restate what those are, and I could consider it as a friendly amendment?
Sure. It was that the board and the public, that everybody be respectful of dissenting points of view, or diverging points of view, different points of view, to make it more simple. And the other one was that chairs and co-chairs of committee be respectful of their committee members and the public.
I think those are both good friendly amendments. So yeah, I would add those in.
Okay,
Thank you for reminding me.
Thank you.
I think those are fine with us too, unless Taina.
They're
Yeah, that's fine.
completely fine.
Michelle, was that it?
Yeah.
Yes, that was it. Thank you.
Okay. Can we unmute Elaine Walsh, please?
Thank you. I wasn't clear in Billy whether it belongs in your amendment, but where you said about respecting staff, I think we also have to add that staff need to respect the board members.
I would say that I think that I understand why we would want that, but I don't think staff have to adhere to our bylaws. So I don't think it's the right place.
Let me say, Rebecca, we are doing amendments, bylaws, or suggestions. What I'm saying is, I understand that the board chair is the administrator of staff, but I'm asking to include in there that there be a respect for board members and their role. I'm going to be very honest. I have found that I have been treated in a very hostile, and I'm not the only one, way. So I'm asking that it be included, that there be a respect, because I can go down the road on sexual harassment, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to go there. All I'm asking is that staff also have to respect the board members and their roles and what they might be requesting, which is appropriate for staff to do.
Thank you, Elaine. I'm not an attorney or a labor lawyer, so I'm going to turn this over to Chuck, because I actually think that is completely not in our place or even legal for us to be putting in here. But Chuck, I'm just going to defer to you here.
What I was going to suggest on this, Elaine, is I don't think it should go in the bylaws, because, as Rebecca said, it's really the staff. But you could decide on a code of conduct for staff, and that's for something that we ought to look at and work with the board chair about, because I think that's something that's certainly appropriate. I mean, there may be an employee handbook. I don't even know. I think we ought to just look at that. If there is, that would be something that went in that, obviously.
Okay, Chuck, I totally support that. If we can put it in there, that's wonderful. But it has to be somewhere, because I'm speaking on behalf of so many women and other board members who have not had that respect. So great, let's put it in a code of I leave it to you people, not me. Thank you.
Apologies, I didn't, when
Enough.
I said that, I didn't mean to dismiss your idea. I just
Well,
thought
I
it wasn't
felt
the place.
that Rebecca, and you know, when I talk about decorum, I did feel disrespected by raising the issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Can we please unmute Alita and then Cause?
With respect to an employee handbook, I think there's one from the Borough President's Office. I don't know if it's possible for boards to have their own additions to that. And I'm not sure, are we talking about the idea of keeping meetings unmuted? Because if we are, I just suggest that it be a pilot program and we could try it out before anything is codified as far as Zoom goes. And that's my only comment. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Alita, what do you mean by a pilot program?
Oh, just something temporary to try it out, either at the committee levels or 1 or 2 full board meetings, and then evaluate whether it's something that works before making it an official, more permanent type of procedure.
Good suggestion. Thank you so much.
That could be one of the shortest trial periods, I think.
that may well be.
Can we unmute Cause, please?
No, Alita asked the question. I mean, the staff are not our employees. They're city employees.
Yep.
Don't they come under the city charter and their code of conduct?
We do. Which is why I said I don't think we have any legal authority to be commenting on this.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
They are city employees, but they are our employees also. We hire them. In fact, if we remember, they said we have to vote on hiring. That's why we used to vote on the district manager and not vote on anyone else. We now have to vote on everyone else. So the board members are included in all that. So we should look and see. We'll look into and see, deal with Elaine's question. You know.
So in that case, we can move the agenda.
Well, hopefully, if people would like to vote on, I think with Billy's motion on this, would we like to vote, folks?
Yep.
Since we can, even though everyone is muted.
I think we got a thumbs up from Ed Hartzog.
Okay. Will, why don't you go through the roll here? Are you still here, Will?
I'm still here.
Of course he's here.
All right. So if your hand is still up, you're opposed to calling the question, and that does not succeed. So we're going to ask everyone who would like to vote no, abstain, or not vote for cause. I saw your hand, Elaine, so I'm going to go to you. If you're voting no, abstaining, or not voting for cause on this, then raise your hand. Elaine, did you?
I lowered my hand. Sorry.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, just wanted to make sure.
I'm glad you saw my hand.
Yeah.
Okay, so are we unanimous there?
Last call. Anybody voting no, abstaining, not voting for cause? I'm just going to run through the names. I'll read first and last name this time. Chuck Warren, Rebecca Dangor, Taina Barrero, Abraham Salcedo, Alita Camp, Barbara Rudder, Barry Schneider, Billy Freeland, Carolina Tejo, Cause, Spagnoletti, Craig Lader, Ed Hartzog, Elaine Walsh, Jane Parshall, Lori Boris, Marco Tamayo, Michelle Birnbaum, Peter Patch, Rami Siegel, Rita Popper, Russell Squire, Sandrea Coleman, Valerie Mason, and Vanessa Aronson. Did I miss anyone?
Can we just make sure that I'm just concerned that there is a number that is dialed in that doesn't have a name, and I just want to make sure that that is not a board member.
They've been here the whole time, but number that ends with 61. If you want to unmute, if you are a board member, you can. You have the opportunity to.
I'm assuming it's not. I just wanted to make sure. Okay, it is not. So.
Right. So I think we're done with the. We have old business, or I don't know if there's any old business, but new business. I think Rita wanted to raise one issue. Rita, go. Why don't we go to Rita, because she had raised this issue before. This is the issue.
Billy raised his hand as well. So we have a few hands. We have Ed, Billy, Rita, Michelle, and Peter. Just to be clear about the order.
Okay.
Do you want to go straight to Rita, or do you want to go in order?
Can we go to Rita and then to Ed, please, just because Rita.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is this the issue, the first vice chair not having a first vice chair? That's what you want to raise?
Right. We should have something in our bylaws. First of all, I'd like to make a motion and speak to it. I make a motion that Valerie Mason be named first vice chair, and we have election for second vice chair because we have this empty spot.
Rita, could I ask you to hold that off for a minute, if you would? Because let me explain why I don't think we need that. And I think if we need that, it's a whole other situation, frankly. But and I'll explain, if you would, hold off on that. First of all, if you look at our bylaws here in Article 2 of officers, and it's E2, duties of the vice chairperson, it says, in the absence of the chairperson, the first vice chairperson shall preside at all board meetings. And in the absence of both, the second vice chairperson shall preside. So if Russell should not be able to preside at a meeting, Valerie, since we don't have a first vice chair, Valerie would take over. And then it says, it said the vice chairperson shall assist the chairperson when necessary. And then it says, so it's really, and is required. So it seems to me that, as we know, the first vice chair's main role is, besides advising the chair, is to preside at a meeting if the chair is not available. And since it says the second vice chair steps into the first vice chair's role, I think that's filled. We don't have any provisions for, and we only elect people for 1-year terms. And so I think, to have another election, it seems to me there's nothing that's provided for that. And just my own view is I don't think that that's necessary, but obviously it's up to the committee.
And Chuck, I would agree with you, but we are in a very unusual situation. We have a chair who may or may not be present, and we have the first vice chair with COVID. Let's say, hypothetically, it's COVID. Who's going to chair the meeting?
I apologize. Can you clarify what you mean by a chair that may or may not be present?
Well, I know what she's saying, but I don't think there's, we don't know.
I don't, so that's why I'm asking for clarification.
I think that we need a second vice chair.
I was just asking for clarification.
That's how we have operated for ever. First vice chair, second vice chair. Somebody leaves, they're gone.
Okay.
That's all. If the chair left, and the vice chair, and all the chairs left, we'd have a new election.
Okay. This is, again, it's my first term on the board, so I didn't know if you were specifically making a comment about. You're saying if it were to be the case, if a chair was not present, is that what you're saying? Okay.
Well, I think
asking is for a succession clause be put into the bylaws. That's all I'm asking. And for tonight, let me rephrase that. Tonight, I would like to nominate that Valerie is made first vice chair.
I don't think we can do that. We're the bylaws committee. We don't have any authority to come up and say that Valerie is vice chair. You can't do that. There's no procedure for that. And we do have a procedure in the bylaws that says she's effectively becoming first vice chair if the chair can preside. That's all I'm saying. We do have a procedure in there. If people feel we need to do something else, that's a whole other provision. I really want to frankly check with the borough president's office to see whether or not, we have these yearly elections, and we're only talking about people only have a year, and there'll be an election coming up, obviously in the fall. So, I mean, it's not like someone's elected to a 4-year term and or a 2-year term, and we have a problem that's a long-term problem. It's a short-term problem. But why don't we go ahead? I'll let others. And why don't we let Russell, who's the chair, our board chair, this first, and then we can get back to others.
So can we unmute Russell and then go to Ed, who is next in order, please?
I'm unmuted. Thank you. Yeah. So I just first wanted to make a comment that I'm not going anywhere. So there shouldn't be any concerns that we won't have a chair or something along those lines. I'm not going anywhere. So just want to make that clear. And beyond that, I do think I agree with Chuck in terms of just what the bylaws say. I think the bylaws provide for certain, basically, if you look at let's look and see which one this is.
You can put it back up. Sorry, Russell.
It's Article 2, right. Section E, subsection 2, subsection C. It provides for essentially, what happens in the absence of a chair. And there's no sort of corresponding provision for other vacancies. So I take that to mean that basically you don't do that in the case of other vacancies. And then beyond that, I would just say that as a practical matter, I don't think it's a good idea for us to have like some kind of mid-year election, because it's just, I sort of feel like people probably are electioned out, and just given the sort of recent history that we've been dealing with in terms of elections, I just don't want to put everybody through that whole process again. And I think given that it's really not necessary as a sort of practical matter, I don't really see the benefit of doing that. And then on top of that, I think in the absence of any sort of provision in the bylaws for the only kinds of elections that the bylaws provide for are these fall elections and, the current system where you've got the nominating committee and so on and so forth. And by the way, we also just chucked out the window at this meeting. So I think in light of all of that, I don't think it really makes sense to sort of go down a road of needing to do a new election this year. I think just given that, I think we're going to be fine with a second vice chair and no first vice chair, I just say that it's not necessary and we just shouldn't do it.
Thank you, Russell. We have a lot of hands up, so I just want to just be mindful of time and move right along. And if we could please unmute Ed Hartzog.
Thanks, Taina. So in the interest of time management, and I think a lot of good ideas, and to all this consternation about, oh my gosh, what will happen without this very sacred nominating committee. Sorry, gang. I was going to propose that what we do here is maybe have some sort of working group off of this bylaws committee to get together and actually assemble some ideas that I'm sure are percolating in people's minds as to amending these bylaws. And quite frankly, looking at these bylaws, folks, I don't know when the last time we had this meeting, but it's been quite some time. Okay, I don't know. We've had maybe the bylaws committee meeting twice since I've been on the board, but the current version, it doesn't matter. That's sort of a rhetorical question. The current bylaws are from April 2011. So I do think we're overdue for just a little tune-up. And maybe we have like a working group, and I would hope that some of the folks who have corporate experience and legal experience and bylaws and parliamentary law will volunteer for that, and they will be put on any kind of working group that we might decide to do. And then this evening, we won't necessarily, go on and on with these ideas, which may be good, but, we could take them all together and address them, because, we're going to have this nominating committee motion addressed at the next full board meeting. But maybe after that, we could have some working group report to this committee, and then the bylaws committee, which I'm sure will have lots of people, because as our bylaws provide, you can come and be a member as we did tonight, which I think is fine. And then we could report it to the full board. And that's my idea. Thanks.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? Are you suggesting that members of the subcommittee or working group are members of the Rules and Bylaws Committee? Just to answer your question, the last time we did meet was March of last year. And our committee formally, other than our 3 co-chairs, has only 3 formal members. And so I'm just a clarifying question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, yeah, I mean, sure. I think so. I mean, I think our bylaws are flexible enough so that even if you're not necessarily a member of the bylaws committee, you can show up. Whatever you want to do. You want to name some, I don't, I defer to you all, but just in the issue of time management, we're 2.5 hours in, and maybe some, whatever. Just throwing it out there again, food for thought. And I'm here, even if you wonder if you always see.
Are you volunteering? I just want to make sure that's.
I'll volunteer, and I'm volunteering, so I'm volunteering. Thank you. I will volunteer.
First member of the working group. Can we unmute Billy, please?
I wanted to raise some new business, if that's okay.
No, Billy.
It's okay. It's a new business section.
Yeah.
Let's talk before we do that. Rita raised the issue. We wanted to resolve that issue one way or the other.
I don't think he calls anything though, Chuck. So I think if he's just raising new business, he can.
Well,
I don't know how you want to proceed. I just, I'm an unfortunate bind here that I've.
Wait a second. Just a minute. I want to be fair to Rita because I asked her to hold off on that while we talked about it. And I think we still should talk about that. And if Rita wants to press on, it's up to Rita. If she wants to do something today, I don't want to have her, I asked her and she very kindly held off.
Okay, fair.
If she would like to pursue that, then we should pursue that now. Or if she'd like to wait on that. But Rita can maybe
it's just hard for us to know who else with their hands raised is going to talk about what, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think Michelle wanted to. Rita, can we ask Rita? Rita, why don't unmute Rita and see how she wants to proceed here? I want to make sure you're.
I think we should proceed as you had suggested that she automatically becomes first vice chair without being called first vice chair. But I do agree with Ed Hartog that we should have discussed it. It should be discussed in the bylaws, and that's where we should work it out.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. Now we can go. Sorry, why don't go ahead, Ty.
Go back to Billy, please.
Billy.
Yeah, but I'm sorry. Do we need to vote on that?
You can proceed, Billy.
Done.
Okay. So I just want to say I think this committee. I don't think we need a working group. I think this committee should meet every month or every 2 months. Yes, I'm happy to volunteer myself toward that. I think these issues are really important. And just because I may have to go before we actually finish this meeting, I wanted to say a few issues that, I think ought to be considered. One, potentially shortening the terms of officers with term limits being 10 years. Someone made the comment earlier, I think having more churn could probably be a good thing. And there are other boards that I believe limit, for example, the chair to 2 years. I think we need to be considering another change.
3 years.
Ours is
3.
Ours is 3 years. What I'm saying is I believe there are other boards, like I think CB2 is an example. No worries. I think CB2 is an example where it's a 2-year term. I'd have to double check. The other thing is our bylaws say only 2 public members per committee with term limits. I don't want to lose, all the institutional knowledge we have. I think one way we could respond to term limits is by creating more public members so that if people want to stay on the board in a public member capacity, we have the room to add people. I mean, and I don't remember how the term limits is going to work exactly, but let's say Chuck and Craig both leave the board in the same year because of term limits. It would be great if one or both could potentially stay on as a public member and then eventually, reapply to the board just by way of example. And then I think, we need to have a better process. This goes to Rita's point for replacing members who step down. I would support special elections. There are other community boards that have a special election process. I think there's a way to do it that's relatively seamless, and you could have, if you needed a special meeting, of the board separate from your full board meeting at which you elect people. I'm going to leave it there, but I just think there's a lot we have to cover in terms of changing the bylaws. It's going to require more frequent meetings. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Billy. You should join the committee.
He says, that's a
active recruitment happening here.
This is it's interesting because I saw, there's, as you say, 3 official members, but, I think you see, this is the first time we've met, right, since March 2021. I think you see there's a lot of interest in people who want to be a member of this committee. So yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Billy. Can we unmute Michelle, please?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the questions I was going to ask was, who are the actual members of this committee? Because I never really
The actual members of this committee are you, Elizabeth Rose, and Kaz, and myself, Rebecca, and Chuck as co-chairs.
Oh, okay, good. Let me say this. It's a little premature, I think, to start to discuss or even have a working committee about changing. I mean, this hasn't been voted on, that we're getting rid of the nominating committee. So bear that in mind. It has not gone to the full board. So until it does, I think it's a little premature to start to talk about all the other rules and regulations that we are going to do to substitute for a nominating committee. So I think we have to wait and see how the vote goes. The other thing is, I think it's absolutely true that we can just leave it with a vacancy. I mean, if you have a chair, you don't have a first vice chair, that it is provided for, the second vice chair takes over those duties. If the second vice chair is not available, the secretary takes over. I mean, everybody is capable. I don't think when we have 1-year terms, I don't think we have to have interim elections. I think that the bylaws currently provide for this circumstance, and I think we ought to leave it at that. But let's not jump the gun. Let's wait for the full board in terms of the nominating committee existence. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Can we unmute Peter Patch, please? Hi, Peter.
Hi. I support what Billy, Rita, and Ed said. I'm going to say I'm open to and mildly supportive of Rita's suggestion. I'm not, sort of strongly. I don't think it's essential, but I think at this point I would lean in favor. I do think a code of conduct is a useful idea. I also think, and this would be perhaps another issue for the committee to look at, in the context of a code of conduct, our roles, responsibilities, and expectations of our officers. Again, not something that I would look to embed in the bylaws, but I think it's worthy of discussion. And in that context, I remember, what was it, at least a year ago, at least one of our members, I don't know if I should mention your name, Elaine, but it was Elaine, mentioned the issue of whether someone running for outside office should be viewed as a conflict of interest. At that point of time, I frankly didn't see it as a significant issue. Now I see it as much more significant in 2 contexts. One is that it is certainly possible for somebody in an officer's position to take decisions that seem to be in line with perhaps other political aspirations. And the second point is, even if that's not the case, it is possible for those decisions to be interpreted as being self-serving in terms of political interest and outside, running for an outside office. So I see much more areas and issues and possible instances of that arising as a material conflict of interest. So I think that's worthy of discussion.
Peter, I just want to comment on that because this is something that I looked into specifically. There is a conflict of interest ruling that carries over a Board of Ethics ruling. The offices of the board or the facilities of the board or any board staff in their campaign. So it's clearly permitted under the city ethics law. And I think I don't think that's something that we at this point could even get into.
Well, I'm not an attorney, so I can't answer the sort of the legal question. But it seems to me, I know you are, but I don't think that gives you the authority to come up with the last word on this particular issue. You might be right, and it's maybe some legal authority that has the right to make that statement can make that statement. I don't see it, and I see it as actually a serious concern. And frankly, the notion that we can't have bases for conduct that represent the point of view of this board, I'm frankly also a little bit uncomfortable with the co-chairs of this committee acting as if they can have the last word. I think allowing the larger community board to have input to these set of issues is worthwhile.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever acted as if that's the case. I think actually we've specifically pointed out throughout the course of this meeting that that is actually not the case. And I think we have reminded everyone who is on this Zoom that that is not the case. So I just want to correct the record. We have reminded you time and again that everything that we are discussing is not within the jurisdiction of this committee, Peter.
I'm sorry, don't understand your point. Would you please repeat it?
My point is that you are implying that we are suggesting, as co-chairs of this committee, that we have final authority on any of the items that we have discussed. And I am clarifying, and this meeting is being recorded, so you are welcome to go back and see the multiple times where we have specifically stated that we are actually not at all within any of our powers or jurisdiction to be people that actually make decisions for this board, and that this all has to go to the full board. So I'm just correcting that.
So thank you for the correction. Now let me check with Chuck and see if he agrees with you. Because Chuck seems to be taking a different position than what you just stated.
No, I'm not taking a different position. All I did was tell you what the Conflict of Interest Board has ruled. And that's the city rule. That's all I'm saying. And you can obviously try to do anything as a board, but I don't think, it's my opinion, that we can do anything that goes against the rules of the city. That's all I'm saying. I'm not taking.
I think, and I will say the final thought on that. I think whenever we have raised something, it's because we've spent time researching, or we have a particular knowledge set that enables us to just state whether or not we think we can actually do something to save us time. I don't think we have ever tried to change the way that conversation was going.
I just want to give Peter the opportunity if he has anything else to say. If not, can we mute him?
Go ahead, Peter.
No, I'm fine. I'm sorry. I muted myself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. Alita?
Thank you. A couple of things with respect to the first vice chair, second vice chair, and the empty slot right now. I think it looks bad to not have a first vice chair. It looks like there's a deliberate decision that Valerie is not competent to be first vice chair. So maybe there's another thing that she could be called, maybe vice chair in general, rather than having an election. It just looks like there's a gap for those who are familiar with how the board is set up with officers. And it looks like, again, I don't mean to be repetitive, that it was a deliberate decision. And to be honest, I like to consider myself a friend of Valerie's, but I would take that position regardless of whether I'm friends or not with someone as second vice chair. I think it is a negative reflection whether or not that's true. With respect to officers also running for office, I'm confused, Russell, because let's just say, rather than speaking directly to Russell, if someone is running and is chair and wins the primary, what happens? Does that person remain as chair? And if Russell wins the election or someone else wins an election in November, that's another month, 2 months of meetings of having that person now being an elected official. And I believe that then you have to resign from the board. So it will come up if Russell wins that there won't be someone in that position of first vice chair. And if you look at 2C, it was pointed out that there's some kind of inconsistency saying that the first vice chair becomes the chair. So maybe that needs some clarification, and given the late hour, and I think some irritability, that maybe now is not the right time. And then also, we for sure can't be more permissive than the city. Whether we could be more restrictive or not with respect to ethics or rules, I'm not sure. That community boards have different ways of doing things that are permitted by the city would suggest that we could have our own rules. But again, I'm not an ethics expert. I'm just raising the question. I'm not the only one who has concerns about this. I'm just vocalizing what people have said to me and what some concerns are, and in talking to people on other boards as well. So I will stop here, given the late hour. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alita. And just in the interest of being consistent with how we were before, I would like to give Valerie the opportunity to just respond to that. I see her sort of like, it looked like she wanted to respond to that. We gave Russell the opportunity before, so can we please unmute Valerie? And then we will go back to Elaine.
Well, thank you. I just want to say that this has nothing to do with me personally. I think that, you know, I've spoken previously to Chuck about the provisions of the bylaws. I think that, you know, I don't need to be called anything but the second vice chair. I appreciate the comments, but I think it's pretty clear that, you know, Russell is the chair, and that, you know, the bylaws say that if he can't preside under a meeting, there's a line of succession. And since there's no first vice chair, that would be me. In the event that, I mean, I don't know the rules, Chuck. If we're in that situation, and Russell wins the election, I don't know if he has to resign because he doesn't really take office until January 1. But I just want to take a step back, because I don't, you know, if we're talking about the bylaws, and I think having a working group and looking at them, I'm looking at it, I would just say, I would look at it in the context of, don't look at it as me, Russell, and the current officers of the board, that there might be a little bit of a loophole, and I don't think it has to be decided tonight, that, you know, if the first and second, if the chair and the first chair moved away, or for whatever reason resigned, or whatever, for whatever reasons, I don't think it's clear that the second vice chair would move into the first chair, into the chairmanship, not the first chair, but the chairmanship. It's clear that if the chair moved away, let's just say moved away, that the first chair succeeds to the chair. But it's not clear, I don't think. And I think we should just look at it. I don't think, obviously, we don't have an issue. And again, this has nothing to do with me and Russell. This has to do with just, I believe, looking at the bylaws in the context of looking at them as an over review. And I have complete confidence in the people on this committee, the chairs, and whoever's going to be on this task force to look at that. And that's all I want to say. Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you so much, Valerie. I think just to like answer your question, I think that you are right in stating that there is not complete clarity, right? Like, there is not a succession plan. It is not like the United States Constitution with a clear line of succession of exactly who proceeds who, right? I mean, or who succeeds who. I think so it's open to interpretation. I think it is like a fair assumption to say that sort of the way it is written, one can assume such, but I also understand and want to be respectful of folks that might think that needs to be explicitly stated. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to respond, since you were
Appreciate that. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
Well,
And
Alita had asked, I guess.
Yeah, Russell should have an opportunity.
Well, I'll just say, yeah, I mean, Valerie explained it, so but I just wanted to, since Alita had asked me, but yeah, Valerie answered the question. There's no issue of overlap with the terms.
Right. I forgot about that part, about the election and then not getting sworn in. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can we please unmute Elaine?
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion and then speak to a couple of issues.
Please.
I'd like to that a working group be set up with the Rules and Bylaws Committee to look at the range of issues we discussed tonight, from the bylaws to the nominating committee, et cetera. And if it's second, I will then speak to some issues.
Would anyone like to second? I think we have a second from Ed Hartzog.
Okay, thank you. Listening tonight, I think there are a lot of emotions, but I think we need to look at that we have now confronted a number of issues, and I think people are aware that last year I took a position on any board officer running for election. And we need to look at that as a board. Indeed, a person who's chair, and I think we should remove the names of people who sit in positions at this point, because we're talking about a bigger issue. But that if someone who is chair is running for an elected office, what is the perceived conflict of interest, not the conflict? And if you look at the new application for the community board, it is now asking about perceived conflict of interest. And we need to look at that for anybody who might be running for a public elected official outside. I am concerned that the perception from the community will be, oh, if you're X and on the community board, you have more value than someone else. I don't know the answer to it, but as you know, if you're on the community board and have certain positions, you might be perceived as having more knowledge than somebody else running. So I agree that in our bylaws, we have some silence. And I don't think bylaws need to be rigid and identify every little thing that's coming along. But we do have silence between a second vice chair and a first vice chair and moving up. It probably was an oversight. It was looked at years ago. I've always thought, under the assumption that indeed, if things happened, the second became the first. Never really looked at the chair, but yeah, you just moved up. But I think in today's world, things have changed and people may need more explicit succession plans. I mean, I don't want to see, bylaws are not rigid. If you make them too tight, then we have no flexibility. So we need to look at that. And I would hope we have a committee that is set up of anybody who wants to be there to give their input to what is happening and understand, more importantly, what are bylaws and what is the guiding principle when you have that. Thank you for giving me that time. And I do have to say, I did feel tonight there were times when if one was going to raise a question, the co-chairs didn't want to hear it. So I would just, under decorum, ask you to look at maybe sometimes how you refer to other community board members. Thank you very much.
Would you like to elaborate on that? I mean,
no, I do not want to.
Okay.
I ask you to reflect on that. I don't need to.
It's hard to reflect.
And that's exactly maybe what I'm saying is I'm asking you all and all committee chairs and co-chairs, reflect on your behavior and inference to other board members or the public. Thank you very much.
On this, can we just adopt this? I think nobody's arguing about this. Elaine made a motion. Can we,
sure.
Anyone who objects to just, approve it unanimously at this point without, we can discuss other things, but I don't think we
lower hands.
Yes, okay. Anybody object to that?
I think we need to lower hands first.
Okay, I'm gonna lower all the hands, and it was Russell, then Rita, then Barbara Rudder for speaking.
Okay.
Okay. So what are we raising the hand on though?
So I think we've approved that. We've approved having the
No, Craig has his hand up and frantically waving, so I think he's trying to vote in a different way.
We have not.
Go ahead, Craig.
Okay, so I'm going to call the names as they appear to me, and then they can explain their votes. Barbara Rudder.
I'm voting no. This is new business. It wasn't down, and that's what I wanted to talk about. We should not be voting on this to new business.
Thank you.
No. And Craig?
Well, I think this is out of order because it was never called to question, and I never had a chance to actually ask my question and state my objection, because I think what Elaine is proposing is essentially what the purpose of the Rules and Bylaws Committee is. I don't understand why we need a working group to do the work of the Rules and Bylaws Committee to look over the bylaws. It seems duplicative and doesn't make much sense to me.
Well, if we object to it, then we should debate it and take a vote on it.
Yeah, I think we just didn't realize that there were other objections, and that's why to calling to question, and that's why Chuck suggested that for the sake of time. But I'm happy to not just assume that, and we will continue discussion until someone calls to question.
Is Rita next?
She is.
Rita, go ahead.
No, I took my hand down. It was up.
Oh,
okay.
A second.
Okay.
So,
I guess Michelle is next. Michelle?
I have no idea what you're voting on. Are you voting on the proposal to have a subcommittee? Is that what we're voting on?
Yes.
To have a subcommittee. That was what you said that you assumed that everybody wanted. It was out the comments, or am I mixing up the comments?
You're right on. You're right on. That's what we're talking.
So this is about a subcommittee. And you've called the question, and we are now in the process of the vote?
No, we haven't called the question.
Oh,
I just said,
well, then I'll wait for the vote. I wasn't sure what we were doing. I'll take my hand down and I'll wait for the vote.
I acted hastily because it's getting late, and I said I thought.
Okay. I mean, my general opinion, it's not of my opinion, is we don't need a subcommittee because agreed, this is the Rules and Bylaws Committee. And I think, and it doesn't preclude others from joining in the discussion just because you're not a committee member. So I don't think we necessarily have a designation. Although I will make this comment. I'm hoping, of course, that that the vote goes down at the full board. But in terms of looking at the bylaws and re-examining them, I have no question that they're probably flawed. You know, I have no question about that. And I hope that we take a reasonable point of view and try to correct the flaws rather than throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, it is a document that has been in effect. It has served us very, very well over the years. And this is not to say that it can't be improved, but I don't want the committee to feel, or anybody to feel, that there's a mandate that somehow the whole thing has to be thrown out and rewritten. I don't think that's the case at all. And if there are a couple of things that have to be tweaked here and there, sure, we can do that. And if there are a couple of things that remain ambiguous, that's probably okay too. Because just remember one thing, the more rules you have, the more rules there are to break. So, you know, you're dealing with a lot of people and a lot of different circumstances, and you need some kind of flexibility. But should it be looked at? Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Since this is not a formal vote, I would like to call on a member of the public that has their hand raised. Can we please unmute Boaz Gali?
Thank you. My only comment is that I've been participating in some of those meetings in the last few weeks, and I noticed that there are lots of votes going on during those meetings. And I know I'm not a native speaker, and English is not my native language, but many times I don't understand what are you voting on. So maybe put in a chat or clarify before you do the vote, what are you voting on? Or maybe it's just I thought maybe it was just my issue, but I noticed just someone other mentioned that it was not clear for him what is the vote on. Thank you.
Thank you, ByLaws. I definitely do not think it is just your issue. We really appreciate you attending and your input.
Can we unmute Rebecca? Rebecca Dango be muted here, I think. She should be.
No, she's fine. She's on the phone. She's good.
If she's fine, it's okay.
Oh, I can lower my hand.
Yeah, she had her hand up. I thought you wanted to speak. Sorry.
Okay, so can we go to Vanessa Aronson, please?
Go ahead, Vanessa.
Hi, I wanted to echo that I was confused about the working group when we have a committee with committee chairs here who are doing that work. But in the interest of the late hour, I sort of trust however the work is best to be done, whether it be that we just trust our committee chairs here and the committee here to do that review that like they said they were, that's fine too. But if the rest of the board really wants to create a working group, I will also vote in favor of that because I think it's essentially the same thing. So I'm just sharing that so that if people have strong opinions one way or the other, that they can either maybe, take down the motion that they made or show us which way we should skew, because I think it's the same result at the end.
Thank you, Vanessa. I think speaking for me, I think the committee is prepared to do the job that it's supposed to do and thoughtfully look at this. And while I can't speak for myself, I know that I have two very intelligent and thoughtful co-chairs, and I'm sure that we can come to some kind of solutions here, and we'll obviously have meetings and people can comment on them, and we'll move forward.
Yes, agree.
Agreed. And I think Billy's point about trying to meet way more frequently in the beginning to try and, really make some progress here would be a good idea.
Can we unmute Cause, please?
Yeah, can we table this? Table the motion?
You can make that motion. That's a motion.
I mean, we're spending hours and hours on something we're not going to decide tonight. The committee, I think, is able and capable and knowledgeable in everything. So we're just spinning wheels all night.
Are you making a motion to table?
Yes.
Is there a second?
We got a second from Rami.
And Rami, okay.
Yep, I got a second from Rami.
All in favor of calling the question? Is there anyone against calling the question at this point? Maybe you can put all the
Can we remove the hands
hands down. People against calling the question? Okay, do you see anybody, Will?
Nope.
No.
Okay.
I'm not Will, sorry.
Can we vote on, this is Cos's motion to table the motion to create a working group.
So if you were voting no, abstaining, or not voting for Cause on the motion to table, please raise your hand.
We have Elaine hand up.
Abstain.
Yeah. Peter Patches hand up.
Peter.
Thank you, Elaine.
Abstain.
Thank you. Marco.
Thank you. Abstain.
Thank you. Sandrea.
Abstain.
Anyone else?
I think we should read the roll because I know at least one person has left.
Sandrea, your hand went back up. Oh, never mind. Okay. So I'm going to read the names of everyone who's here. Chuck Warren, Taina Barrero, Abraham Salcedo, Alita Camp, Barbara Rudder, Barry Schneider, Carolina Tejo, Cos Bagnoletti, Craig Lader, Ed Hartzog, Elaine Walsh, Lori Boris, Marco Tamayo, Michelle Birnbaum, Peter Patch, Rami Siegel, Rita Popper, Russell Squire, Sandrea Coleman, Valerie Mason, Vanessa Aronson, and Rebecca Dangor. Did I miss anyone?
I do not believe you missed anyone.
Okay.
Okay. So I think that passed and motion is tabled. Are we ready to adjourn?
You have two hands up from Barbara and Kaz.
Okay, Barbara?
Just have to say my second piece. The first thing that bothers me is when people continue talking after the vote. The second one is this is new business. New business can be, I want to discuss in the next meeting whether we should have a working group, not this whole discussion and not a motion and not somebody talking about something very specific. It's totally wrong. We have open meeting laws, and I don't know if this is Robert's rules or bylaws. I'm not sure of the difference, and maybe you'll tell me sometime offline, Chuck, what one goes, but we haven't been following it. And am I right? And I just want to say one other thing. Chuck, as always, you are the fund of knowledge. Taina, you have gone overboard being fair, listening to everybody. And I just want to say thank you to the group.
Being what to everybody?
Open for everybody, listening to everybody, and being fair. And I want to say thank
Look,
you.
I gotta play a role. I'm not the attorney in the group, so
You don't have to be an attorney. Chuck, I think, am I right in saying that under new business, we don't have motions and long discussions about details, that it's not belong there?
Usually that's the case, but this is sort of an unusual committee. So that's something we should think about. You know, we're talking about internal board procedures and stuff. It's a slightly different.
And maybe it should be part of bylaws that under new business, we do not have, we mention things we want.
We'll get to a lot of those issues.
we're gonna have lots of
We'll
meetings.
put our heads together.
Can we unmute Kaz, please?
Kaz, you're up.
Yeah, can we adjourn the meeting till September?
We can adjourn. The motion to adjourn is a privileged motion. You don't mean to a time certain. We'll just adjourn.
Yeah, but I never exert privileges, so can I exert two tonight? Thank you, co-chairs.
We thank everyone. We thank everyone.
Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending.